Every person has a soul. One day, people learned that the soul has its own essence, anima. Sometime later, they learned to manifest it in the form of various abilities. But not everyone had a strong anime. Due to the emerging distribution of ranks, people whose anime was too weak began to be despised. Since E rank was the lowest stratum of society, such people were treated the worst. Schools became a tool for raising the status of the country. During military operations, people with the highest ranks were sent to the front lines. The school where our main character studies is no exception. Students with strong abilities often chose to be bullied to prove their superiority. But today, Michael and his friends were unlucky to choose a goal that was too tough for them. Jumping up, John created a huge iron axe. Smiling, he quickly approached Michael. The guy himself froze in place. He was amazed that his opponent was stronger than he had expected. Coming to his senses, he created a tanfei in each hand to hold off John's attack. The next moment, the iron axe collided with the iron tanfas, making a characteristic sound. Due to the oppressive force of the enemy, it was difficult for Michael to remain in this position for too long. He turned to Ethan, standing to the side, wondering why in such a situation he was just watching everything. Our hero was in no hurry to answer Michael. However, a couple of seconds later, scratching the back of his head, he said that he could not help him in any way. These words angered Michael even more, and he promised that he would definitely deal with him later. The next day, Michael, as promised, decided to deal with his unlucky classmate. He asked how long Ethan was going to continue causing problems for them. He hated even the thought of someone so weak being in their class. Our hero apologized, saying that one cannot expect anything from someone who is in last place. His words infuriated Michael. Gathering all the strength in his fist, he was about to hit Ethan, hoping that he would die and go to hell, but our hero managed to safely dodge. He said that wishing for death was too harsh, so he asked whether it would be enough to simply admit his guilt. Sean, who was standing behind Michael, began to roll up his sleeves, saying that Ethan should get 10 hits for each member of their team. Sighing, the hero realized that he would be beaten throughout the break. Therefore, he had no choice but to flee. Other classmates laughed as they watched this scene. However, Ethan failed to escape from his classmates. He was surrounded at the exit of the classroom. One of the guys said that using abilities at school is prohibited, so Ethan shouldn't even try to oppose them with anything. Immediately after this, our hero received a strong blow to the chest. Others watched Ethan being beaten, saying that F rank deserved only such treatment. They honestly didn't understand why someone like him would even come to school and disgrace their class. Slowly getting up from the floor, Ethan said that it wasn't his fault that Michael's team lost. Sean was about to hit our hero once again, wondering how Ethan dared to contradict them so brazenly. At that moment, the door opened and their class teacher, Mr. Thomas Reed, entered, announcing from the threshold that he had good news. Because of the teacher's arrival, Sean and Michael had to leave Eton and return to their places. Noticing that Mr. Reed was too joyful today, the students asked what was the reason for this. Someone shouted out the assumption that their teacher was finally getting married. Our main character managed to get up from the floor during this time and sit down in his place. Thomas could see that the hubbub in the classroom wasn't going to stop anytime soon and got everyone's attention by slamming his fist on the chalkboard, telling everyone to listen carefully. After that, everyone fell silent, and he said that their school had been awarded by the state. Glenn suggested that they had once again received some stupid offer from a dubious organization. When he asked how long they would continue to participate in something like this, the teacher came up to him and said that it was not he who decided this, and that they should just accept what was happening. Mr. Reed said it was all down to the achievements of the senior students. Afterwards, he returned to the board and said that from that day on, the school was becoming a site for combat exercises, so all students would be divided by military rank. Everyone listened carefully to their teacher, amazed that the school actually agreed to this. Meanwhile, Mr. Reed continued, saying that from this moment on, his charges become comrades in arms. He also said that all the teachers had been given a rank, so now he should be called the commander of the 10th platoon. Glenn asked what would happen to the students in the future. The man replied that there would most likely be many people willing to take on graduates of this school, after which he said that they needed to make every effort to attract someone more influential to their side. Ethan asked what would happen if one of the students did not want to be a military man. Mr. Reed looked at the guy who asked him the question for a few seconds, taking his time to answer, after which he said that no one is forced to become a military man against his will. If someone does not want to take part in this, then they should send a request for transfer to another school. The man said that Ethan should carefully consider the possibility of a transfer presented to him, because he himself understands his situation. The hero was about to answer something, but he was interrupted. Classmates sitting in front demanded from Mr. Reed an explanation of the reason why their school was turned into a military school so suddenly. Taking a box from the table, the teacher replied that he had mentioned earlier that the 11th graders had performed well. Emptying the contents onto the desk, Mr. Reed explained that they were the ones who helped give the school military status and all received the rank of sergeant. The next moment, everyone saw on one of the desks a lot of student tickets where the rank was indicated. Patting one of his students on the shoulder, Mr. Reed said that 11th graders are the hope for a bright future for their country. Handing out a ticket to everyone, the teacher said that only the best of his charges would receive the rank of corporal, all the rest, the rank of lance corporal. After handing out tickets to everyone except Ethan, he announced that the platoon leader could reevaluate rank at any time. Our hero turned to Mr. Reed to ask a question, but the man ignored him, continuing his speech. Ethan made another attempt to ask why he was not given a ticket. With his back to him, Mr. Reed said that in the entire school, there was only one student who could not achieve the rank of private. What we heard greatly surprised our main character. Turning to him, the teacher said that Ethan would just be a loser. The hero was not at all happy with his new title, which foreshadowed even more bullying from his classmates. After class, Mr. Reed called Ethan to his staff room. Looking through the documents, the man said that they should discuss Ethan's future. He admitted that he would not be able to pull out such a hopeless student and suggested that the hero change schools. The guy was shocked that he was offered to change schools. Looking at the documents, the teacher explained that even ordinary studies were not easy for Ethan, and if we talk about military training, he simply could not withstand the load. Ethan said that if Mr. Reed helps him unlock his potential, then there is a chance that he will succeed. After his words, the man looked at the guy in surprise. The next moment he laughed, saying that Ethan had a good sense of humor. The hero was unpleasant to realize that the teacher first paid attention to him only to laugh. After calming down, Mr. Reed said that the rank system would make it even more difficult for Ethan to survive in this school, and as a teacher, he couldn't help everyone. After these words, the hero's assumption that Mr. Reed was aware of all the bullying was confirmed, and it became obvious that he simply did not want to have an F-rank student. It was also not difficult to understand that the man secretly hoped that the constant insults would force Ethan to give up. He asked the teacher his opinion about whether souls could be divided by rank. The man was amused by his question, the answer to which was too obvious, of course. Souls are also divided by rank. After receiving the teacher's answer, Ethan clenched his fist. Looking at Mr. Reed, he said that he did not agree with this statement. As soon as the break was over, the teacher and our hero returned to the classroom, where he said that since the classes were now divided into squads, each sergeant must report attendance. Turning around, Anna counted everyone who was in her squad and reported that there were 10 people in the first squad and there were no absentees. Next was Michael. He said that there were 11 people in his squad with no absentees. Watching them, Ethan could not understand what all these army games were for. Mr. Reed asked the remaining third squad to report. Raising his hand, Glenn asked if that was all, to which the man said that he needed to follow the orders of his superior. Sighing, the guy replied that the total number of people was 10, 2 were missing, and 1 was a loser. Leaning back in his chair, he summarized that there were 8 people in his squad, which caused laughter from his classmates. All eyes were turned to Ethan, who was now not even considered human. The hero was already accustomed to various kinds of bullying, so he simply ignored all the ridicule in his direction. The teacher also did not attach any importance to this and announced that today, instead of lessons, there would be an event on the field. He said that government intelligence officers are hiding in the school, but even the teachers don't know where exactly. They will watch how the students react to such sudden changes. Mr. Reed was interrupted, asking him to get to the point. Sighing, the man said that battles would be held among the school students. All teams were distributed by the administration. Eliza said with disappointment that if only 11th graders fight among themselves, then their class will no longer be interesting to anyone. Ethan, on the other hand, was glad that he could pass the time watching the fights. Suddenly, Mr. Reed clarified what rank Glenn's ability was. The guy answered irritably that he had a C rank. Afterwards, the man asked what rank his fighting abilities had. Questions about his strength irritated Glenn, and he asked why so many questions, because even without them, it is obvious that he can defeat anyone. Mr. Reed approached his ward, and placing his hand on his shoulder, said that in this case his first battle would be against the 11th graders of the first squad. Realizing who he had to fight with, the stunned Glenn jumped up from his seat. Mr. Reed, meanwhile, told everyone except the third squad to go to the field, after which he said that Glenn's squad had 20 minutes to prepare. Everyone began to leave the classroom, wishing the third squad good luck. Glenn did not know what to do, because it was obvious that they would not be able to stand against high school students, who all received a high rank. Besides this, there was another factor that irritated him greatly, namely the fact that there was an F rank on his team. Rising from his seat, he walked towards Ethan, who was calmly lying on his desk. A couple of seconds later, Glenn stopped next to him. Rising from his desk, our hero asked what Sergeant Glenn needed. Glenn grabbed Ethan by the hair, saying that this manner of communication infuriates him. As he approached, he said that if the hero did not want to get punches in advance, then he should change his manner of speaking. Glenn then tosses Ethan aside, saying that the team they will be fighting has a real monster, Antonio. He said that it was difficult to defeat him even with joint efforts, but this time Ethan takes the place of a normal warrior, so the result of this battle is already obvious. With incomprehension, the hero asked, "Since they will lose anyway, then what good is he to them?" Glenn grabbed Ethan by the tie, asking him if he understood the difference between shame and ordinary defeat. Then he touched our hero's forehead, saying that if he goes down in ranking, then only Ethan will be to blame. Turning away, the hero replied that Glenn's rank was not so high as to worry about it. Containing his irritation, Glenn sank down next to Ethan, saying that now he couldn't even beat him well because he was needed on the battlefield. Smiling, Ethan asked what difference does it make who ends up getting hit in the head. Looking at his classmate, Glenn said that he would assign him one simple task, after which he sat down next to Ethan, asking if he could handle it. The hero replied that he would do whatever he was ordered. Having received his answer, Glenn grabbed Ethan by the vest. He said that Ethan would become his human shield. A few minutes later, the third squad was in full force on the field. Before starting, Mr. Reed checked the functionality of the microphone. A couple of moments later, he announced the start of fighting between squads. The teacher announced the leaders of both detachments, between whom a battle would be fought any minute. Although Glenn took Ethan as his shield, he had a bad feeling. Approaching the leaders, Mr. Reed asked if their troops were ready to begin, and they nodded in agreement. The man turned to Antonio, telling him to show everything he could do today. Looking to the side, he explained that government intelligence officers were watching them today, so they couldn't make a mistake. Antonio replied that his squad would do everything possible. After this, it was announced that the teams needed to take their starting positions. Glenn's squad did not even count on victory in this battle. It seemed to them a waste of time. When all the participants stood opposite each other, Mr. Reed announced the start of the battles, and he also announced that the leader of each squad should receive a bracelet. Glenn grabbed Ethan by the vest, telling him to follow him. He put the bracelet on our hero's hand, saying that this will help him last longer, because the bracelet uses the owner's strength for protection, but breaks from a powerful blow. It was also announced that, according to the rules, the one whose bracelet broke is usually eliminated, but due to the difference in the experience of the teams, a change was made to the rules. Ethan asked if he had to be held by the shirt like a cat, to which Glenn irritably replied that he should silently fulfill his role as a shield. Meanwhile, Mr. Reed announced that the victory would be counted towards the team that could hold out for 5 minutes. For Glenn's team, this change did not make the situation any better, because none of them would be able to withstand their opponents for that long. Immediately after this, Ethan set the timer on his watch. Looking at the teacher, he thought that if his team won, they might once again reconsider his transfer to another school. A couple of moments later, the leaders greeted each other. Mr. Reed then gave permission for the fight to begin. Glenn immediately grabbed Ethan and pulled him along. He rushed behind his comrades, hiding from his opponents. The guy hoped that in this way he would be able to hold out for these 5 minutes. As Antonio's squad began to advance towards them, one of the squad members asked what their formation was. But moments later, no orders had come from their commander, leaving everyone confused and unsure of what to do as the enemy began to surround them. Glenn shouted for everyone to shut up and just protect him. He must hold out for the specified time for them to win. The next moment, Olivia kicked the opponent in front of her in the stomach, incapacitating him. Antonio also went on the attack. In a matter of seconds, Olivia managed to defeat several opponents and collect their bracelets. When the girl looked towards Ethan and Glenn, the latter was overcome with real horror. The next moment, she ran towards them. Glenn pulled Ethan even closer to him, telling him that he had to stop Olivia and protect him by any means necessary. The hero suggested running in the opposite direction to gain time. When he looked to the side, he saw the teacher smiling. The man said that he would help him change schools. This infuriated our hero, so he broke free from Glenn's grip, standing in front of the approaching girl. When she was far enough away, he grabbed her hand, surprising Olivia. However, the next moment, she materialized armor. A couple of moments later, her entire body was covered in armor, hiding a bracelet underneath. With enthusiasm, Ethan said that this armor is perfect for Olivia. Her abilities are not only unimaginably strong, but can also create something so beautiful. The girl interrupted him, telling him not to make a fool of himself, because he was not as weak as he wanted to seem, since he kept up with her. In response to her words, he pointed at Glenn, saying that his leader was running away. While Olivia turned her attention to Glenn, Ethan checked the time on his watch and saw that there were still a full 3 minutes left. He tried to figure out how he could hold out all this time. When the girl turned to him again, he asked if he could call her sister. Judging by Olivia's lack of reaction, Ethan assumed that she didn't like the proposal and suggested that they might just be acquaintances. The girl told the hero to stop stalling for time and reveal his ability. Ethan did not know where to go and tried in any way to get Olivia to talk, which began to significantly irritate the girl herself. She again demanded that Ethan reveal his abilities. He seems much stronger than his comrades. The hero asked her not to rush things. He said that she must be well aware of the importance of consistency, especially when meeting new people. Olivia could no longer listen to his empty chatter and began to approach the guy with a murderous aura. Noticing her changed mood, Ethan said that he would reveal his ability to her. The next moment, a dull glow began to appear in his palm. Olivia froze, waiting to see what would happen next. Contrary to all her expectations, a small F-rank dagger materialized in his hand. She stared at the dagger for a few seconds, occasionally glancing at Ethan. Then she sighed heavily, running her hand over her face. When Olivia asked if Ethan was the F-rank loser, the guy nodded, confirming her guess. She was overcome with great disappointment. Despite everything, Ethan himself was proud of the dagger he created, saying that it was no worse than an S-rank weapon. When the guy noticed that the girl turned around and headed in the opposite direction, he called out to her. Ethan screamed that she couldn't just leave when she insisted so hard on seeing his ability. The Kopek piece ignored him and walked on. He made another attempt to stop her, shouting that if she didn't stop, he would sneak up on her from behind and attack. Olivia turned around, saying that she didn't see the point in wasting her time on an F-rank loser. However, something happened that she did not expect. In a matter of seconds, Ethan was behind her with his blade raised. In surprise, the girl froze in place, watching the blade approaching her. At the last moment, she put her hand in front of her, blocking the attack. Olivia watched as the blade slid across her armor, leaving a small scratch in its wake. Smiling, Ethan said that his dagger was really sharp. Our hero's classmates, who were watching this scene, laughed, saying that Olivia was afraid of some weakling who could not even inflict any damage on her. The girl said that even though Ethan's reaction speed is not bad, but with a rank like his, it will not help him. Then she turned around, saying that she saw everything she wanted. Looking at her retreating back, Ethan thought that he managed to buy a little more time. However, when he looked at his watch, he saw that only 1 minute had passed, and he needed to hold out for 2 more. Olivia at this time was approaching Glenn, who was backing away. Stepping back, he said that it was better for her not to approach him. But the girl ignored his words and quickly appeared next to him, asking if he could prove to her that he was better than Antonio. At the same moment, Glenn noticed a nearby stone. He was happy about this and thought that this was a great chance, because there were quite a lot of stones here. Olivia asked what exactly Glenn was going to do to prove his superiority. Glenn replied that since she was so interested, he would be happy to show everything, after which he sat down and touched the ground, activating his ability. Olivia didn't understand what he was doing. Ethan, on the contrary, understood everything perfectly. He realized that Glenn had been hiding his real rank all this time. Our hero called out to Olivia, warning her that her opponent's technique was too dangerous. Glenn himself used extraction on one of the stones sticking out of the ground. A couple of seconds later, the guy towered over the girl, standing on a huge stone. Looking at Olivia, he said that the most interesting part of the show would now begin, after which he used the swing ability, which allows you to use the extracted object as a weapon. Everyone watched what was happening in amazement. Olivia guessed that all this time her opponent had been running away, looking for a suitable stone for his ability. The next moment, he lifted the stone on which he had just stood upward, as if it weighed nothing. Then he threw it at the girl. He said that with this attack, he would get rid of Olivia and prove his superiority to everyone. Glenn was so carried away by his fantasies that he did not notice someone else's presence behind him. The next moment, he was attacked by Antonio, pinning him to the ground. Glenn shouted that sneaking up on an enemy from behind is for weaklings. Turning his attention to Olivia, who had managed to build a shield that prevented her from colliding with the stone, Glenn realized that she was stronger than he had expected. Suddenly, the stone in front of her broke into many small pieces. Afterwards, the girl saw Antonio in front of her, who broke the stone with his ability. Looking at him, Olivia said that this was her opportunity to show herself, and he shouldn't interfere. The guy replied that it was too dangerous, and his duty was to protect his subordinates. Looking at him with displeasure, Olivia asked if he really thought that she herself could not cope with this situation. Antonio replied that he was firmly convinced that the girl would have done a great job herself. But the problem was different. Looking behind him, he nodded towards Glenn, who was rushing at him with a club, and said that this guy would not calm down so easily. Using his ability, Antonio instantly found himself behind Glenn and attacked him, throwing him over himself onto his back. Ethan, standing to the side, watched what was happening with interest. Suddenly, Antonio turned his attention to him, which made the hero tremble. Ethan shouted that he was giving up. He really didn't want to fight someone like Antonio. The guy who approached asked why Ethan warned Olivia about the danger before Glenn attacked. The hero replied that their sergeant can sometimes overdo it without thinking about the consequences. Continuing to approach, Antonio said that Ethan did not know how to lie at all. He, in turn, retreated back, recalling that a couple of seconds ago he had given up. However, Antonio ignored him and stood next to Ethan, intercepting his hand with the blade. The hero of the hands, due to such an unexpected attack, released the weapon from his hands, pointing it upward. But the next moment the dagger was already on the right, and he grabbed it with his free hand. Ethan swung it at his opponent. Antonio had no choice but to let our hero go. After that, he jumped back to a safe distance. He stared at Ethan, studying him. Taking a defensive stance, Antonio asked who he really was. Ethan replied that he was an ordinary warrior from the 3rd Squad of the 10th Platoon, with an F-rank ability. Antonio wanted to say something, however. At that moment, our hero's attention switched from the enemy to the wristwatch, which showed that he could hold out for only 1 minute. The guy asked what Ethan was looking for there. Instead of answering, our hero scratched the back of his head and laughed awkwardly. Then he pointed towards the stands, saying that there was a crowd there that was just waiting for Ethan to make another mistake. Antonio realized that his opponent was simply playing for time and said that he hated people like him most of all. When he asked why Ethan didn't at least try to win, the hero backed away from the guy, asking what he could do on his own. Antonio said that it was advice, not a warning. Ethan asked if there was any point in that, since he was only an F rank. Antonio said that at the end of the battle, the scouts would choose the worst ones and send them to other schools. After his words, the hero began to approach his opponent, saying that he did not want to go to another school. When Ethan stopped, he said that he could not guarantee Antonio that he would remain alive, since he had become his opponent. Immediately after this, a red aura began to surround our hero. It seeped out of his body, filling the surrounding space. The system reported that Ethan's physical indicators had tripled, and he could also see not only the level of someone else's ability, but how it worked, as well as its weaknesses. Ethan's condition will only return to normal if the opponent dies, or his soul essence is completely destroyed. The true ability of our hero is the skill of perfect execution with the enemy, which has an S rank. All this time, Antonio remained in place, observing the changes that were happening to the guy opposite. He assumed that the low-grade dagger was just a part of the manifestation of his true ability. Turning his attention to Antonio, Ethan saw that the opponent's ability was only a B rank, which was that he could catch any target. Antonio was shocked when our hero said that his ability was not as outstanding as he previously thought. The guy realized that he needed to be careful with Ethan, since he was able to see the abilities of other people. Meanwhile, the hero, surrounded by an aura of murder, pointed a dagger at the enemy, saying that he could no longer endure and hold back. He asked if Antonio could stop him. Without waiting for an answer from the enemy, he again asked whether he could cope with this task. Feeling completely superior to his opponent, Ethan changed his position. Rotating towards in one hand, he waited for Antonio to make his move. Classmates watching this did not understand why those two were just standing there. Michael, who was starting to get annoyed by this, shouted at Antonio to go on the offensive because he had come to watch Ethan being beaten. Antonio himself tried to determine how best to approach his opponent. Although our hero was not in a protected stance, he did not have any open areas to strike. Olivia also felt this strange aura coming from Ethan. This guy no longer looked like the loser he seemed to her at first. Looking at him, she felt fear. She tried to get her emotions under control, realizing that they had to help Antonio, and ordered everyone to attack Ethan. The next moment, everyone ran to carry out her order, attacking the enemy, but he deftly avoided them. Surrounding the hero from all sides, Olivia finally managed to reach Ethan. The next moment, our hero found himself pinned to the ground by Olivia. Dissatisfied with what happened, Antonio asked the girl why she did it. She replied that she was also obliged to protect all members of the squad in which she was a member. Antonio said that he did not need anyone's protection. Olivia's words about whether he was sure of this made him think. When the girl attacked him, the guy quickly left the line of attack. He also avoided a trap set by other members of the squad. It all looked more like a cat playing with its prey. Adjusting his tie, he replied that he wasn't sure he could really handle Ethan on his own. Noticing the shadow of a smile on Antonio's face, Olivia was shocked and did not hear his words that she had better dispel her ability before she got hurt. The next moment, her armor collapsed and began to disappear, causing the girl to fall into bewilderment. The others also didn't understand what was happening as they watched as their bracelets began to break without any reason. When Ethan noticed Antonio's gaze on him, he said that they had great teamwork. However, the guy still continued to gaze intently at the hero, causing him to be wary. Sighing, Antonio asked if Ethan had come to his senses. Ignoring this question, our hero turned to Olivia, saying that 5 minutes had already passed and they should get off him. Turning around, Antonio said that next time no one would bother them. Ethan replied wearily that once was enough for him. However, Antonio ignored him, advising him to practice a little before their next meeting. With doom in his voice, Ethan shouted after the departing guy that this time was enough for him, and there was no point in them meeting again, but he was again ignored. Following their sergeant, the rest of the squad members hastened to leave the field. Left alone, our hero tiredly sank to the ground. The shocked Mr. Reed announced the result of the battle, which was hard to believe. Glenn's squad won. At the same time, an important conversation took place in the director's office. Director Roger handed over to his guest the documents that he had previously requested. Taking in his hands a stack of documents containing students' personal files, he came across a recently revealed 11th grade student, Antonio. Patrick noted that in middle school, he did not have a single award, but in high school, all the victories were his. After reviewing all his data, he concluded that he was only able to get this far thanks to his rank. While studying the affairs of other students, his attention was drawn to the fact that one of the students had an F rank. He asked Principal Roger for details about this student. The man replied that Ethan had the lowest rank. After much discussion, they had to place this student in the combat class. Patrick was interested in this student. Turning the sheet over, he saw that there was a more detailed description, but the director said that it was not worth reading. In the special circumstances footnote, it was stated that Ethan lost his parents at age 8 and was unable to awaken his abilities due to shock, then suffered bullying from other relatives, and at age 10, he awakened his ability when the family was burgled. Something about this alarmed Patrick, because usually all children awaken their abilities at the age of 8. Previously, he had not encountered other cases where the awakening of a child's ability manifested itself later due to any circumstances. Patrick asked if Ethan's fighting abilities had changed since Ethan's awakening, and the headmaster replied that when he arrived at school, he still had an F rank. Something about this guy's case haunted him, and Patrick began to suspect that Ethan might be deliberately hiding his power. Putting the stack of documents aside, he said that he would like to meet the student in person. The director was surprised by such a request, and he hastened to say that Ethan would soon change schools due to his low rank. Afterwards, the man asked why it was decided to introduce military training into this particular school. Hearing this question, Patrick froze. Faced with his guest's warning glance, the director became frightened, thinking that he had asked a question regarding a secret government project that was not supposed to be discussed. He apologized, saying he shouldn't have asked that question. Looking at the affairs of the two students who caught his attention, Patrick replied that they were preparing for attacks from the north, and the system he introduced will help students change and become stronger. Every morning of our hero began the same way. He woke up exactly at 6 in the morning, after which he begins to get ready for school. In front of the mirror, he tells himself that today will be a good day, and at 6:30 he leaves the house. Because he was given cleaning duties, he has to go to school so early. This morning at the entrance, he met other students who had come to school at such an early hour. Rumors about what happened yesterday spread throughout the school, so Ethan's name became on everyone's lips. Grinning, the girl said that most likely Antonio's team simply lost their vigilance yesterday, since they lost to someone like that. They couldn't believe that some loser had defeated the 11th graders with an ordinary dagger. Upon arriving at his class, Ethan washed the board, then brushed the chalk off the brushes, thinking that it would be better if they hung regular marker boards. Having finished with this, the hero moved on to washing the floors not only in the classroom, but not in the entire corridor. A little later, Michael and Sean approached him, the latter saying that Ethan's attempts to do at least something had benefited their team. Putting his hand on the hero's shoulder, he said that he managed to greatly surprise everyone that day. Sean admitted that they didn't expect anything from Ethan back then, but somehow they all managed to come out on top. After that, he left the class. At the next break, Glenn approached him. Ethan thought that now they would start beating him again. However, contrary to his expectations, a classmate asked our hero to get him some math handouts. Ethan was surprised that they weren't going to beat him up. He thought that because of what happened on the field, then they stopped bullying him. The next day, students from parallel classes also began to approach him with various requests, such as doing their homework for them. Even though the bullying against him stopped, they began to use him for their own purposes, which exhausted our hero much more. When the lesson ended, Mr. Reed asked no one to leave. He reminded everyone that today is the last day to join the unit. For 10th graders, this was mandatory, and there was no way to avoid it, so the teacher hurried his students to make a choice. Ethan thought for a long time about what he should choose and whether he would be taken anywhere at all. Mr. Reed said that a separate conversation would be held with those who did not choose anything. Everyone in the class started laughing at Ethan, saying that no normal unit would accept an F-rank fighter. Our hero did not give any importance to their words. However, when he read the list of units offered to him, the former calm disappeared and was replaced by horror. All units on the list are directly related to the army or the use of the ability. Many have already decided where they want to go and even split into groups. Michael was no exception and immediately headed to the selected unit to submit his application. Ethan was left alone in the class, not deciding where he should enroll. He had already studied the proposed list several times, but our hero did not see a solution to the current situation. Suddenly, he noticed that in one of the divisions, there were no restrictions on ranks. There was also no interaction with abilities. It was only intended for the development of physical abilities. Ethan decided to sign up here because he assumed it would only be regular physical training, and there wouldn't be a lot of people. True, the hero found it strange that one unit was given an entire gym, while others had to be crammed into smaller rooms, which caused dissatisfaction among some. When he approached the gym, he was surprised by the huge number of people crowded at the entrance. Ethan thought he had come to the wrong place. He looked at the sheet that indicated the location of the unit he needed to make sure it was the right place for him. Suddenly, someone from the crowd shouted that there was an F rank, turning everyone's attention to Ethan. Having examined everyone, the hero realized that almost everyone here was from the 9th grade. He didn't understand why they had gathered here because they didn't have to join the unit. As everyone shouted in excitement that the leader was coming, Ethan moved closer to see who they were talking about. The next moment, he realized who exactly they were calling the leader and decided that he needed to leave here immediately. Antonio noticed Ethan's face among the crowd and walked towards him. Due to constant pushing, our hero was unable to get out of the crowd. He was accidentally pushed towards the approaching guy. Confronted with him, Ethan asked in confusion if Antonio was the leader of the training unit. He nodded, saying he didn't expect to see Ethan here. Our hero was convinced that he needed to get out of here as quickly as possible. He did not want there to be a fuss if they fought with him in front of so many witnesses. This did not escape Antonio's keen eye, and he asked Ethan where he was going. The hero replied that he was mistaken and had come to the wrong place. Ethan promised that he would go look around here and immediately return when he found the office he needed. To his words, Antonio replied that there was nothing else nearby. He looked at Ethan for a few seconds, after which he expressed his assumption that he had come here in the hope that there would not be many people here. The hero admitted that this was indeed the case, but too large a crowd had gathered here, so he changed his mind about entering here. Antonio replied that it was not so easy to get into his unit, so Ethan need not worry about a large number of participants. But even with these arguments, our hero refused, recalling that his abilities are too insignificant. The unit leader had no choice but to force our hero inside. Heading to the middle of the hall, Antonio said that he would now conduct an entrance test, which Ethan would take along with everyone else. Taking a quick glance at everyone who wanted to join here, he was surprised that more people than usual had gathered today. Then he announced that the testing would consist of simply repeating a couple of exercises for Antonio, namely 30 burpees, 30 push-ups, again 30 burpees, and 30 squats. When Ethan heard that only one who could complete 10 approaches would be able to pass, he thought it would be easier to die than to fulfill this condition. A few minutes later, the daredevils from the first group were already exhausted, performing only the third approach. Some were unable to continue and decided to give up. They chose this unit because they thought it would be easier to get into than the others, but this turned out to be far from the case. Ethan watched from the sidelines, realizing that he had made a huge mistake in coming here. Looking at Antonio, who performed all the exercises he listed without difficulty, without even slowing down for a second, the hero understood why he was called a monster. Looking at the other side of the hall, the hero could only sympathize with the exhausted students. A couple of minutes later, stopping on the fourth approach, everyone gave up, unable to even stand up. After announcing that the first group had dropped out, Antonio turned around, announcing that testing of the second group would now begin. After his words, everyone recoiled from the guy in horror, confident that they would definitely not be able to cope with this impossible task. The girl standing next to our hero pushed him forward, saying that he would go first. This left only Ethan in front of Antonio while the others stepped aside. Turning to the guy standing opposite him, the hero asked if Antonio was really human, because he wasn't tired after doing so many approaches. Looking at Ethan, the leader of the unit said that he should not try to stall for time like that time on the battlefield. Then he turned to those who decided to sit on the sidelines and said that the second group could begin doing the exercises, ignoring all dissatisfied objections. A couple of minutes later, while doing the exercises, Ethan's mood changed regarding this introductory task. At home, he often trained on his own so that he could defend himself. Although the hero thought that he was pretty good at sports, training face-to-face with Antonio awakened his competitive spirit. But unfortunately, our hero's reserve of stamina was far from that of his opponent. At some point, Antonio said that the second group was stronger than the first, so he decided that they should speed up a little. Ethan was sure that this guy took pleasure in tormenting other people in such a terrible way. After a minute passed at an accelerated pace, everyone except Ethan decided to give up and were now just watching what was happening. Seeing how our hero performed approaches on a par with Antonio, they could not believe that his abilities really had an F rank. Our hero did not intend to give in to his opponent, so he performed exercise after exercise, fighting his irritation towards Antonio. The leader of the unit himself was not even out of breath, calmly performing the exercises at a given pace. One of those watching lost count of which approach they were already performing. The girl sitting next to him suggested that the seventh had already gone. Hearing this, others began to support Ethan, recognizing that he was not as bad as they said he was. A smile also appeared on Antonio's face. He thought that it was not in vain that he had noticed this guy on the day of the battle. Ethan himself was already at the limit of his strength. Continuing with the exercises, Antonio said he was confident that the hero's reaction time that day was not just a coincidence, but that his well-developed stamina helped him maintain his pace. After these words, Antonio accelerated again, challenging Ethan. The hero could not believe that his opponent seriously decided to do this. Many thought that competing with a newcomer at such a speed was too cruel even for Antonio. But when they saw that Ethan was doing everything on par with the leader, they were very surprised. The second group began to support our hero, shouting that there was only a little time left and he would succeed. As he completed his final set, Antonio complimented Ethan on his excellent work. The next moment, joyful screams were heard in the hall. Having completed all the exercises, Ethan wanted to lie down and not get up. This pace was not usual for him. Congratulations poured in from the outside on the successful completion. He sank to the floor, thinking that since he was praised, then everything turned out not so bad. Standing next to him, Antonio extended his hand to Ethan, saying that he had been accepted into the training unit. Grabbing the offered hand, the hero thanked the guy and said that this was enough for him. Picking him up from the floor, Antonio said that Ethan could come here to train starting tomorrow. Trying to pull his hand away, the hero repeated again that what he received today was more than enough. Approaching him closely, Antonio said that training together was much more effective, and besides, he had been waiting for a suitable opponent for a long time. Ethan replied that if he had completed just one more approach, he would have died, and also reminded that Antonio is annoyed by people like our hero. Ignoring all his words, the guy slowly said that it took him a whole year to find a member for his unit. Ethan realized that he was completely unheard, and there was no point in arguing with Antonio. A few days later, our hero stayed after school to clean the classroom. He sighed heavily, thinking about the fact that he didn't want to go to training today. Ethan still couldn't believe that he actually ended up in Antonio's unit, despite the fact that he absolutely did not want to encounter him ever again. Because of this, everyone's attention was now focused on our hero, which he did not like very much. Every day, everyone began to tease him about his chosen unit. Some were jealous and tried to find out how he got to Antonio. Ethan tried several times to get out of training, but it turned out to be useless, because in such cases, Antonio did not leave our hero alone for a minute. For a moment, he considered breaking his arm, but he quickly dismissed this idea, realizing that even so, Antonio would not leave him alone. Lost in thought, Ethan did not notice that there had been someone else in the class all this time. When the hero finally paid attention to the stranger, she asked him if he was studying here. Ethan nodded and asked what was wrong. The next moment, she took out her student card with a title, saying that if she was not mistaken, then in this school it is customary to greet her this way. Ethan was surprised when he learned that this girl already had the rank of corporal. Alicia asked what the title of our hero was, but he hesitated to answer. Noticing this, she demanded his name and rank in a commanding voice. Ethan immediately reported that he had been awarded the rank of Rookie of the 3rd Detachment of the 10th Platoon. Only then did he realize that he had answered her without thinking, because they had been forced to memorize it many times. Looking at Ethan, Alicia was surprised that he was just a newbie. After she extended her hand, saying that she was glad to meet him, the hero returned her handshake and asked what she was doing here. Alicia replied that starting tomorrow she would join the ranks of the 10th Platoon. After receiving her answer, Ethan smiled, saying that he hoped they would get along in the future, and then headed out. He said he still had work to do, so he had to go. Before Ethan could open the classroom door, Alicia grabbed his backpack and pulled him back. Then she pushed him against the wall. Ethan watched in surprise as the girl approached him and blocked his escape route. The hero said that he really needed to go. Looking into his eyes, Alicia said that first he should show her the school. Ethan had no idea what to do in such a situation, especially since Antonio could come here at any moment and then he would not be able to escape. The hero made another attempt, saying that he was in a hurry and she should look for someone else, but the girl stood her ground, answering that Ethan suited her perfectly. He realized that today was an extremely unlucky day, and he would not be able to get away from either Alicia or Antonio. Approaching Ethan a little more, the girl said that he should show her the school immediately. Sighing, the hero asked where she wanted. Alicia asked him to take her to Sergeant Antonio. The hero could not help but be pleased by such a successful coincidence of circumstances. He hoped that since he was busy because of Alicia, Ethan might be allowed to go home. He replied that he was just heading to Antonio. At the same moment, the object of their discussion appeared outside the door, clearly in a bad mood. The leader of the unit opened the door, making Ethan startled at the sudden appearance. When he asked if our hero had thought about skipping today's training, Ethan replied that he was just going to it. Alicia turned to the guy who came in, asking if he was Sergeant Antonio. He replied that she should communicate more respectfully with elders. The girl said that the distribution of ranks prevails here, rather than age. Approaching him closely, she asked if his rank was higher than hers. Without waiting for his answer, Alicia pulled away from Antonio, saying that they were about the same level. Loosening his tie, he asked if she wanted to make sure. Ethan noticed their belligerent attitude and asked them not to start a fight right there. Suddenly, Alicia switched the topic, asking if Antonio had a girlfriend. The guy replied that there was no one. Smirking, Alicia said that this is quite obvious. She is also very annoyed by such types as Antonio. He replied that in this regard their feelings are mutual. Then she took a couple of steps back, saying that he should come up with something for decency, be it a girl or a bride. When Antonio asked what Alicia was talking about, the girl replied that her family was quite conservative, so for his own safety, it was better for him to listen to her advice. Ethan, standing on the sidelines, had absolutely no idea what was going on, or what the relationship was between these two. Having lost interest in Antonio, the girl switched to our hero, asking if he wanted to date her. Ethan was surprised by such a sudden question from the girl. He asked why him. She replied that they were the same height, and she liked it when the interlocutor's gaze was on the same level as her. Confused, Ethan replied that it was too sudden and he needed to think, surprising Alicia with his reaction. For some time, she just stood there looking at the guy. Afterwards, the girl smiled, saying that he was embarrassed and looked quite cute. Approaching him, she asked what rank his ability was. Hesitating, Ethan replied that he had an F rank. Alicia backed away from him, saying he was lying. The hero replied that he was telling the truth. Taking a step forward, the girl said that such people simply do not exist. Antonio intervened in their argument and reminded him that it was time for Ethan to go to training. He asked the girl to leave so that he could pick up his ward. Sometime later, our hero was completing the last set of pull-ups. Seeing that Ethan's body was already trembling, Antonio said that he was only staying for the last time. When the hero sank to the floor in front of Alicia, the girl admitted that she thought that their training was just an excuse. But, to her surprise, the guys were actually playing sports all this time. Turning to the girl, Ethan asked her for help, since she decided to follow them. The girl replied that she did not see the need for it. The hero was amazed that only recently she demanded to show her the school, and now instead she is watching their training. Pointing to Ethan, she asked why Antonio was training with him. He replied that the guy was an ordinary beginner whom he decided to help, because for him, physical characteristics are more important than rank, and he had also been looking for a suitable partner for a long time. The girl smiled, guessing that the real reason was not so simple. Approaching Antonio, she said that she did not understand why waste her time on him, only if he did not see some potential in Ethan. The guy tensed after her words. Alicia asked him to tell her what Ethan was hiding. After what she saw during this training, the girl was sure that Ethan's abilities were much higher than just F rank. Antonio replied that he knew nothing. Alicia realized that it would be difficult to extract any information from him. Then she decided that it was best to ask Ethan himself about it. Lying on the floor, the hero replied that the girl was very mistaken about him. He was just a useless F-rank newcomer. From his answer, it was too obvious to Alicia and Antonio that this was a lie, but they could not do anything about it. Sighing, the unit leader grabbed the hero by the shirt, saying that there was plenty of time to rest and they needed to continue training. The next day, Mr. Reed announced that there was a new student in their class. Looking towards the door, he told the girl that she could come in. A couple of seconds later, a smiling Alicia stood in front of the whole class. Everyone looked at her with interest, because it was the first time someone had been transferred to them. Alicia turned to the teacher, asking where her place was. The man replied that she was sitting on the horse with the first squad, but first she needed to introduce herself. Having determined where Ethan was sitting, the girl replied that she liked the third squad and headed in his direction, ignoring the teacher's objections. Walking past the rows, Alicia asked to be placed in the third squad. Ethan and his seatmate watched the new girl in bewilderment. Pointing to her neighbor Ethan, Alicia said she wanted to sit there and asked to switch seats. The guy replied that this was his place and he did not intend to give it up. The girl didn't like his answer. Hitting the desk with her hand and leaning towards the guy, she asked if he really didn't want to change seats, adding threatening notes to her voice. He had no choice but to give her his seat. When the girl took her new place, one of the guys called out to her. Glenn asked displeasedly who she thought she was to allow herself to do such a thing. Smiling, she asked if his rank was really higher than hers, after which she said that she knew that among the students, the highest rank was corporal, and she was precisely a corporal. Glenn stated that he was the leader of the squad, but the girl no longer listened to him, telling the teacher that she would sit here. Mr. Reed approved of this new girl's arbitrariness. Alicia turned her attention to Ethan, noticing how he sighed resignedly, covering his face with his hands. The girl asked if he really didn't like her so much that he looked so unhappy. Placing her hand on his shoulder, she said that she sat next to him in the hope of establishing communication with each other. But now she does not know what to do. Ethan replied that he would like to be friends with her, and it's not that he doesn't like her. He was not allowed to finish speaking by the teacher, who asked Alicia to introduce herself to the class and tell about herself. The girl inhaled, saying that she had already sat down. A moment later, she stood up and said that she would introduce herself from here. Glenn turned around, saying that she needed to stand in front of the whole class, because these were commonplace rules of decency. Alicia replied that she could be heard well from here, and then she smiled sweetly, saying that she was very pleased to meet everyone. Other students couldn't help but notice her for her overly impudent behavior. When she said that her rank was corporal and her manifested ability was White Jade Goblin, everyone was very surprised. Alicia finished her story by saying that she hopes for productive studies together. Mr. Reed and many of the students did not take their surprised glances off the girl until the very end. Ethan also looked at the girl. He didn't expect someone like her to be interested in him. He knew that White Jade Goblin was the only inheritable ability. Usually abilities are not inherited because the engraving of the soul, the essence of which is manifested in abilities, cannot be the same. One day, people appeared who believed that they could pass on their ability to others. In this way, they wanted to make it stronger, more accurate, and more dangerous, like a sharp blade. One of the families succeeded in this after some time. It was the Kim family, whose members were descendants of the king of the Shan dynasty. They had to leave their families and devote themselves to education and battles. To protect their bloodline, they adhered to internal marriages. All children born into this family had pale, marble-like skin. Thus, this family managed to acquire an inherited ability that allows them to summon a White Jade Goblin. But over time, it turned out that only the daughters of this family could summon the goblin. After several centuries, the family's numbers declined greatly, and the clan was on the verge of extinction. In the last generation, a child was born who could summon a sword-wielding goblin. The girl adopted all the abilities and hidden skills of her family. Currently, Alicia was the only one who possessed the highest level of swordsmanship. She was special from birth and was a true genius. Having finished telling her story, the girl asked if she could sit down. Mr. Reed, who had not completely recovered from the shock, replied that she could sit in her seat, after which he announced that from today, Alicia is the deputy leader of the 3rd Detachment. Dissatisfied, Glenn jumped up from his seat, asking how some new girl could immediately become his deputy. Slapping the teacher's desk, the teacher said that objections would not be accepted. Glenn understood that his place as leader was under threat, and he did not like it very much. Meanwhile, Ethan said that Alicia turns out to be quite famous. The girl, in turn, replied that she was just pretty, that's all. Looking into his eyes, she said that not only she was special here, but he was too, because it was not often that you met someone with an F rank. Ethan had never heard anyone of his rank being called special before. Sighing, he asked Alicia to stop looking for something in him that was not there. Laughing, the girl replied that she would definitely reveal all his secrets. Glenn couldn't think about anything other than the emerging threat in the person of the new student. He was determined to show this impudent girl his place at all costs. After the lesson ended, a big break began, during which everyone rushed to the dining room. Some have discussed how Alicia would be much better as the leader of the 3rd Division than Glenn, who is inferior to her in many ways. Sean remembered that on the day of the battles between the squads, Glenn gave strange orders, hiding behind other people's backs all the time. Walking past Glenn, Sean's interlocutor admitted that at first she thought of Alicia as a simple, arrogant girl, but after watching videos of her fights, she realized that she was great at giving orders. Elena still can't forget how cool Alicia was in that battle in the video. The girl had no doubt that Alicia would soon remove Glenn from his position. Listening to all this, the anger inside their current leader began to boil more and more. He realized that if he did not immediately do anything about the new girl, she would immediately take his place. Alicia herself was in the classroom with Ethan. Rising from her seat, she invited him to have lunch together. Our hero refused her offer, saying that he still had cleaning to do. Grabbing him by the vest, the girl said that she had no one to be with, to which Ethan objected that she was currently the most popular student in school. After letting him go, Alicia replied that she hated those who communicate with her only because of her merits. Ethan apologized to the front, saying that he would not be able to join her at lunch because he was really very busy. When he listed to her everything that he had to do for the period, Alicia said that this was too much for one person, and even the leader of the squad could not do it all alone. Ethan looked away and agreed that it was really difficult to do this alone. Leaning closer to him, Alicia asked if he ran errands for the other leaders for an hour. Her look became wild when she suggested that Ethan could carry out the assignments assigned to him by the whole class. Moving away from the girl, the hero replied that he helps everyone else from time to time. It seemed to him that if you start dividing responsibilities, complete confusion will begin, and asked that Alicia not misunderstand this situation. The girl listened to her friend in surprise. When he finished his explanation, Alicia pursed her lips in irritation. The next moment, she again grabbed Ethan by the vest and dragged him along with her. When he asked where they were going, the girl replied that she needed to deal with those who were irresponsible about their responsibilities, shifting them to others. Walking into the cafeteria where all her classmates were, Alicia easily found Michael and approached him. He looked at her in surprise, asking what she needed. The girl asked if he was not appointed responsible for cleaning the office. If this is so, then why does he shift his responsibilities onto the shoulders of someone else? Spreading his arms to the sides, Michael replied that this should be a given, since Ethan was only an F rank who could only be entrusted with this kind of task. With her hand over his mouth, Alicia told him she wasn't interested in his pathetic excuses. Smiling, she said that everyone must mind their own business. Alicia considered bullying the weak to be a very low act. She said that she would not stoop to something like that, and hoped that Michael understood perfectly what she was driving at. After her words, the guy turned very pale. When the girl removed her hand, he apologized, saying that he would not behave like that again. Pointing to Ethan, Alicia said that Michael should apologize to him, not her. Having received the apology due to our hero, they then went to the teacher. Alicia told him about the current situation. The man said that he was not aware of what was happening with Ethan and appointed the girl responsible for the distribution of responsibilities. The girl was happy with the powers given to her and thanked Mr. Reed. Ethan himself did not share her joy because she literally turned his entire habitual way of life upside down. Meeting Sean in the hallway talking to Nicholas, Alicia said that she was now dividing up the duties and handed one of them a mop, putting him in charge of the floors and the other in charge of cleaning the boards. The guys looked at the girl in bewilderment, asking why they should do frills. When Sean said that F rank should handle this, Alicia silenced him by hitting both of them in the throat with a mop. She said that shifting responsibilities to one person does not add honor to them. At that moment, a disgruntled Glenn called out to her. Alicia turned her attention to him, asking if he wanted to help with cleaning. The guy ignored her question, saying that she should call him leader. The girl nodded, then asked what he needed. He asked in bewilderment whether a leader really needs to approach his subordinate only on business. The girl didn't answer anything, silently looking at Glenn. Then she shrugged, saying that it would be better if she became the leader of the squad instead of him. The guy was infuriated by her words. Turning around, she said that since the leader of the squad did not need anything, she would go. Glenn stopped her, telling her to come to the school roof after school because they needed to discuss something about the squad. Ethan heard Alicia being called to the roof. To hear her answer, he got up from his seat and sat by the door so as not to be noticed. When the lessons were over, the girl went to the roof. Our hero followed her, keeping his distance so as not to be noticed. Rising to the very top, the girl opened the door and walked out through it without the slightest hesitation. Ethan was in no hurry to climb higher, expecting that Alicia might change her mind and come back. He waited a minute, making sure that no one was going to come down from the roof. Only then did he rise higher, thinking that Glenn had made a big mistake by challenging someone like Alicia. The hero stopped near the slightly open door, carefully listening to the conversation. Alicia asked what exactly Glenn wanted to discuss with her, to which the guy replied that by coming here, she herself had to realize everything. Then he pointed to a group of his people standing behind him. Smiling, the girl said that their leader was far from a failure and was quite popular at school. Several dozen students from different classes stood in front of Alicia. Glenn said that since she is a member of his squad, he does not intend to give up in the future after today's conversation. Alicia wondered if the leader of her squad was so weak that he couldn't talk calmly without a crowd of his friends behind him. Her words made Glenn laugh. Trying to hold back the gusts of laughter, he said that it was time to teach his deputy a lesson. The surprised girl pointed to herself, asking what exactly they were going to do. Then she looked at Glenn, asking what exactly he was going to teach her. Kneading his hands, the guy answered, explaining in a more understandable language that he would make Alicia regret her behavior. The girl asked what was wrong with her behavior. Glenn replied that she must obey her leader's orders. His words made her laugh a lot. She asked why on earth she should do this. Alicia said that Glenn must either be stronger than her or smarter for her to obey him. But the guy standing in front of her did not fit any of these points, so she said that she did not recognize him as a leader. Glenn couldn't believe that Alicia actually dared to say something like that. He commanded those behind him to activate their abilities. The girl watched her opponents, assessing their strength. She replied that they had quite a few melee weapons, but they were completely ordinary, without any additional enhancements. Glenn was sure that so many opponents must have shaken Alicia's confidence. He asked if she felt insignificant when looking at his team. The girl replied that this should apply more to themselves than to her. Glenn replied that she should stop talking nonsense, because it would not be difficult for his people to deal with her in a matter of minutes. He reminded her that using powers in the school was prohibited, especially ones as strong as hers, so if she activated it, she would be severely punished. At the same moment, several fighters stepped forward. He was confident in himself, because he selected only those who could calmly use their abilities without fear of being noticed. He knew that in order to maximize her strength, Alicia needed a sword, which the girl did not have. Comparing a professional without the opportunity to use his ability and losers, but with abilities, it was obvious to him that the latter would win. Glenn said that the girl had better give up from the very beginning, because she would not be able to cope with such a crowd. If she changed her mind about him, he promised that she would be treated a little more gently. Suddenly, Alicia asked if Glenn had any thoughts when looking at Antonio, who is quite famous in this school. The guy didn't understand what she was trying to say. Alicia said that everyone knew the rank of her normal ability, and then asked if they knew the rank of her combat ability. When she took a step forward, the guys who had come forward began to back away in fear. Glenn didn't understand what they were doing, because a swordsman without his sword poses no threat against a whole crowd with abilities. Sighing, Alicia said that he should have tried so hard during the battle of the squads. Then she pointed to her forehead, asking if he had forgotten what they were taught. She recalled that according to statistics, one A-rank fighter can easily defeat 100 less powerful opponents, after which one horn grew from her forehead, and her hair began to turn lighter. Alicia said that the first thing a fighter must learn to get an A rank is to go alone against the crowd. After her words, everyone froze in horror, realizing that such an opponent was too tough for them. Noticing that everyone began to hesitantly retreat back, Glenn shouted that it was stupid to be afraid of an enemy who didn't even have a weapon. Then he pointed at the girl, ordering everyone to attack her together. The guy holding the bat decided to trust Glenn's words. The next moment, he attacked her first, swinging the bat at Alicia. Contrary to his expectations, the girl simply stood there, not reacting in any way to his attack. Alicia watched the bat approach her face, wondering if this guy had overestimated himself. The next moment, the bat froze a couple of centimeters from her. The guy looked at her in surprise. The girl grabbed his hand, holding the bat at a distance. Then she threw the enemy aside and he flew into his comrades who were standing nearby. As a result, all three lay unconscious, having flown into the fence. After that, she attacked a guy standing nearby. Alicia dealt with a large number of opponents in a matter of seconds, without making much effort. One of the guys she defeated tried to get up from the ground, thinking that this girl was invincible even without a sword. He admitted that against her, having an A rank, they are nothing. Sitting down next to him, Alicia said that he had given up too quickly, so he would never reach her level. Her words seemed something akin to ridicule for the guy. Raising his head, he said that, being special from birth, she could not understand ordinary people and their efforts that they put in to achieve something. Alicia listened calmly to the guy, waiting for him to finish. He was firmly convinced that a person who had the strongest ability from birth would never be able to understand how hard it is for others to do something. When the guy fell silent, the girl rose from her knees, saying that he could continue to think like that. But her original fighting abilities were D rank. It was clear from his face that he did not believe her words. Glenn shouted that she couldn't have a D rank. There wasn't a single person in the whole country who hadn't heard about her family and what gifted children were born into it. He said that for her manipulations, Alicia should have come up with something better. No one would believe that someone like her had no talent. Shrugging her shoulders, the girl agreed that having a D-rank combat ability, despite the fact that the main ability passed down from generation to generation has an A rank, is a manifestation of true mediocrity. Then she said that despite all her desire to use the sword, she would have to restrain herself so as not to receive disciplinary punishment. By this moment, many had already managed to come to their senses and rise from the floor, looking at her with fear. Alicia realized that it was pointless to prove anything to them with words, because they would never acknowledge the enormous amount of effort she put into becoming who she is now. Looking at her palm, covered with many calluses, she said that she would show them all her efforts in practice. Glenn decided to attack her first, rushing at her at the same time along with everyone else. However, not even a minute had passed before all the attackers lay powerless on the floor. Alicia turned her attention to Glenn, who stayed away. He didn't like that everything didn't go according to his plan, and the girl turned out to be much stronger than he expected. Stretching her neck, Alicia said that everything would end as soon as she dealt with him. Glenn chuckled, saying that they could only resolve the situation between them by fighting one-on-one. Then he spread his arms to the sides, telling the girl to attack him first. Alicia was alarmed by Glenn's careless self-confidence. She assumed that he had hidden something under his jacket in advance. She fulfilled his request, approaching him with lightning speed, and told him that he should relax his abdominal muscles. Then she pointed her fist towards his stomach, intending to destroy what the guy hid there. Watching Alicia, Glenn was glad that she fell into his trap so easily. He knew that the girl was deliberately avoiding blows to the face, because she would be punished if everything was found out. That is why he took a step back and ducked, intending to take this blow to the face. Alicia tried to understand the reason why her opponent was smiling in such a situation. At some point, Glenn bent even lower, exposing himself to the girl's fist. He was sure that if he pretended that he had been beaten by Alicia, he would not receive punishment. When the girl's fist was a couple of centimeters from him, suddenly someone intercepted the blow, preventing Alicia's fist from touching Glenn. Ethan was glad that he was on time, because if he had been late even for a second, something irreparable would have happened. Gurren was surprised that F-Rank decided to interfere in their fight. Ethan stood up, throwing out fragments of plastic, which took the entire blow upon himself, ignoring the questions of the surprised guy about what he forgot here. The hero stepped on Glenn's hand, silencing him, after which he apologized for such a grave mistake in relation to his leader and asked if he had suffered much. Holding his bad arm, Glenn looked at Alicia, asking if she called this non-entity here. Pointing to our hero, the girl replied that he himself followed her. The notes of dissatisfaction in her voice touched Ethan to the core. He said that this life was too cruel to him, because he was not welcome anywhere. A few moments later, Alicia's ability dissipated. Looking at the distance from where they were to the front door, she didn't understand how Ethan managed to cover this distance in such a short time. It would have taken him at least 10 seconds to make it in time. Somehow he managed to get to them before her fist touched Glenn's face. He was also able to completely absorb her blow without getting hurt. The girl clenched her fist, realizing that this guy might be stronger than she originally thought. Feeling that something was digging into her palm, she unclenched her fist and was surprised to find pieces of plastic there. Our hero pointed to the sky, saying that the sun was already setting and invited everyone to go home, forgetting about what happened here. Rising to his feet, Glenn asked who Ethan thought he was that he dared to decide for others. He said that our hero and Alicia would be in big trouble if he complained to the teacher. Making the most innocent face that Ethan was capable of, he asked in surprise what he had done. He just protected his comrade in the squad, for which, on the contrary, he was entitled to praise. Alicia agreed with him, saying that their junior did protect Glenn's face. Because of this, there would not be enough arguments to accuse them of anything. The guy laughed at her words, saying that she shouldn't be so self-confident. Pointing towards the door near which he had previously hidden the camera, Glenn said that everything that happened was recorded. The guy admitted that he was going to show this video to the teacher, proving that Alicia and Ethan, in conspiracy, not only violated the school rules, but also brutally beat other students. When the guy finished his enthusiastic speech, the hero pointed down, asking if this was the camera he was talking about. Glenn looked down in bewilderment and saw the wreckage of his camera, which would be very difficult to restore in this condition. Ethan apologized to the leader, saying that he didn't know it was a camera and he mistook it for a regular decorative item. Awkwardly scratching the back of his head, the hero said that this was the first thing that came to his hand, that he could find here to soften the blow. Kicking one of the fragments of the camera, Olivia said that Glenn's plans were not destined to come true, but there is something that worries her more at the moment. Grabbing Ethan by the vest, she asked how he managed to stop her blow. Raising his hands in a gesture of surrender, the hero asked why she was treating him like that, since he had just helped her. The students who came to their senses watched in surprise what was happening. One of them said that A-rank fighters have not only good skills, but good luck. Alicia heard these words spoken and froze for a couple of seconds. Then she headed towards them, dragging Ethan along with her. The guys watched the girl, wondering what she was going to do. She suddenly told them to stop whining about their low rank and advised them to learn a lot from Ethan. Alicia said that they should seriously think about her words and what happened today, and then turned towards the door. Everyone just watched in surprise at the retreating girl, who was dragging our hero along with her. Glenn never moved from his place, even when the door slammed shut, leaving him and his defeated team on the roof. He lowered his head, clenching his fists. Glenn really lost today. That same night, Ethan had a dream about events that happened many years ago. In an apartment covered in splashes of blood, screaming heart-rendingly, a woman with severed limbs tried to crawl away from a little boy with a knife, calling him a monster. Blood covered the boy's entire body, strewn with countless bruises from beatings, which gave him a terrifying appearance. Standing in front of the man's corpse, the boy said that he was no different from his uncle and aunt, who raised him this way. At this moment, Ethan woke up, jumping up sharply in bed. The next moment, the alarm clock, set for 6 in the morning, rang. But the hero did not pay attention to this annoying ringing, being overwhelmed by memories from the past that haunt him in nightmares. He exhaled heavily for a few moments, returning to reality. He had stopped having this dream since entering high school, but recent events had caused his nightmare to return. A few hours later, while walking next to Ethan, Alicia noticed that something was wrong with him today. She asked if something happened to him. Smiling, Ethan answered in his usual manner that he was just a little tired, then changed the subject, asking where they were going after all. Looking at Michael's group walking next to them, the girl replied that she did not know this, because the teacher only told the sergeants detailed information. But most likely, they would have a joint lesson with the medical class. A few minutes later, they stopped near a tall building, after which Glenn said that they were there. Other voices were immediately heard from outside. Students from another school had been waiting for them for a long time and openly mocked our hero's class because they did not show their best side by being late on such an important day. An irritated Glenn approached them, asking who they were. The girl in front ignored his question and said that they were just interested in looking at Alicia, who was rumored to be extraordinarily beautiful and talented. Glenn said irritably that Alicia held the position of deputy in his squad, and if they had something to say, then they could say it to him. After his words, the students of the other school laughed, saying that their attempts to appear military looked stupidly funny. Glenn could not listen to this any longer, so he said that he was the sergeant of the 3rd Detachment of the 10th Platoon of the High School of Special Training, and then demanded that they tell him who they were. One of the girls asked who he thought they looked like. He replied irritably that they were the dregs of society. A man suddenly appeared and put his hand on the shoulder of one of the girls, saying that they should not quarrel with other schools. Lewis apologized for his classmates' behavior, saying they were a little worried. Then he extended his hand to Glenn, saying that he was very pleased to meet you. Glenn pushed away the hand extended to him, answering that Lewis should not waste his time and explain what was happening here. The guy suggested that Glenn calm down first so that they could have a normal dialogue. Alicia came out in front and said that he really should calm down and pay close attention to what he says, because their training rating has dropped a lot lately and they need to restore it. Afterwards, the girl turned her attention to Lewis and asked for forgiveness for Glenn's behavior. Lewis replied that everything was fine and then said that he was very glad to meet her. Alicia ignored his outstretched hand in greeting, saying that their squad had come for a joint lesson with the medical class. Then she asked what students from another school were doing here. Smiling, Lewis replied that they were the very class that should work together with them today. The guy also said that they had been waiting for this day for a long time. Afterwards, the students from the 2 schools headed to the bank building, where their assignment would most likely take place. Lewis said both schools have a relationship with the bank and felt it would be a great location for their practice. Noting the absence of people on this street and the presence of a security guard at the entrance, the guy assumed that the bank was closed for today on the occasion of their arrival. When they went inside, a man greeted them, saying that they had arrived on time. Some of the students had heard that security officers would be assigned to them, so they were not very surprised by the appearance of men in uniform. She took a few steps forward and introduced herself, saying that she was really looking forward to this day. The men laughed and replied that she was brave beyond her years. Alicia asked what they would do today. After her question, Jack, who met them, laughed even more, saying that he was starting to like her and would gladly take her into his unit when she grows up. Sometime later, they were led inside the bank. Taking off her sword, Alicia thought that their fighting abilities were completely ignored and treated like little children, and she would have to try hard to prove her worth. Suddenly, she clicked on Lewis, who was standing next to her. He immediately approached her, asking what business she had with him. Alicia asked him to split his class into 4 temporary squads because they needed to appear in a good light in front of the bank. Then I looked at my classmates, who were talking with the employees at full speed. Sighing, the girl said that they were acting too carelessly and no one was taking the whole situation seriously. An employee passing by said that he and other guys would go for coffee and asked if they would drink something. When Alicia heard that the cafeteria had a coffee machine and other drinks were also available for purchase, all her seriousness disappeared. Leaving her sword behind, she ran after the man, figuring that it wouldn't hurt to relax a little. Besides, there were people from the security department here. Ethan decided not to join the others in the cafeteria, remaining in the room. He believed that everyone had relaxed too much. Lewis suddenly walked up to him. The hero did not expect such an unexpected appearance of the guy, so he could not hide his surprise, wondering what he needed. Smiling, Lewis asked if Ethan was close with Alicia. The hero assumed that Lewis wanted him to arrange a date with Alicia and assured him that he would handle it perfectly. The guy waved his hands, saying that this was not why he approached Ethan. The hero turned out his empty pockets, saying that if Lewis wants to ask him to buy something, then he does not have money with him. Lewis said that assumption was also incorrect. The next moment he said that he was interested in Ethan himself. Afterwards, he asked if he would like something to drink. Pointing behind him, Lewis said he saw a drink machine nearby. Ethan agreed to his proposal and headed in the indicated direction. He stopped for a second, thinking about whether he should warn Glenn, but deciding that everything would be fine without him and moved on. A few minutes later, he was enjoying a cool cola. Watching Ethan, Lewis said that he seemed too carefree. Hearing the question of whether Ethan was hiding his abilities from the entire school, the hero almost choked on his drink. Although he replied that this was not so, Lewis was not. I was left with a strange feeling that Ethan did not fit into the class team at all and seemed out of place. Smiling, the hero replied that being carefree is his motto in life. Lewis asked what rank his ability was. Ethan replied that he was F-ranked. Surprised, Lewis asked if he was deceiving him. The hero replied that this was indeed the case. Not fully believing Ethan's words, the guy asked if he was checking him, to which the hero replied that he had no need to do that. Ethan then took a step back and threw the empty can into the trash can, which stood a few meters away from him. Lewis was surprised when the can went straight into the trash. He looked at Ethan with enthusiasm, saying that it was cool and then asked how he did it. The hero did not understand what struck Lewis so much in this action and replied that he simply threw the can. After his words, the guy was eager to do the same. After making sure there was no drink left in the can, Lewis stood in his throwing stance and threw the can into the trash. However, he was unable to do the same as Ethan did, because his can flew over the trash can, crashing into the wall, and then fell to the floor. Lewis ran for the can, saying that it was not as simple as it seemed from the outside, to which Ethan replied that the guy just had bad reflexes. Throwing away the can, Lewis said that he was not very good in combat, so he transferred to the first aid department and then asked how Ethan, with such a weak rank, managed to stay in the combat class. The hero replied that Alicia and his innate luck help him. Ethan then approached Lewis, asking what his ability was. The next moment, the guy's right hand transformed into a blade. Looking at it, Ethan said that it was a pretty good ability with a lot of potential. Lewis transformed his hand back, saying that he often hears this, but the problem is that it has not changed at all. The hero guessed what thoughts were spinning in Lewis's head and assumed that he was interested in Ethan's rank because he was thinking about transferring to the combat class. The guy smiled awkwardly, answering that it was indeed so. Ethan had absolutely no understanding of the man standing in front of him. He said that in his opinion, providing medical care is much better, because this way he can save the people dear to him. Rubbing his neck, Lewis admitted that he hadn't thought about it that way, and maybe he really just needed to reconsider his attitude. Listening to him, Ethan bit his lip painfully, trying to suppress his emotions. A few moments later, he put on his usual smile and put his hand on Lewis's shoulder and encouraged him, telling him that he needed to be more confident and take things easier. Deep down, Ethan was terribly jealous of him and thought that it would be much better if he too could use his ability to save people rather than kill. Then the hero turned around, saying that they had stayed too long here and they should hurry back. At the same time, Mr. Reed met with the organizers of the assignment for his students near the bank building. One of the men pulled out grading forms with a list of students from the envelope, suggesting that they begin grading. The teacher looked at Pavel in surprise, saying that the main task had not even begun, to which the man replied that improvisation saves such people. He advised Reed to first evaluate his best students by imagining what grade they could get, because this is a common task for consolidating theory. The teacher liked the proposed approach and agreed. He quickly assigned grades based on the students' ranks. The only one teacher Reed gave the lowest grade to was Ethan. After he handed the documents back to Pavel, he suggested they go and have coffee. He had just recently learned about a new coffee shop nearby. Returning from the cafeteria, 2 people were placed at the entrance as security, which was very exhausting if you had to stand around for a long time. Sometime later, Sean invited the girl standing next to him to play rock, paper, scissors. The one who loses goes for drinks. Lisa agreed, and they started the game, not noticing that men dressed in military equipment were approaching the entrance of the building. At the same moment, Michael approached them with an open bag of chips, saying that someone was coming this way. A few moments later, a group of unfamiliar men stopped at the front door of the building. Hearing the students talking about the appearance of some strange people, Jake stopped with a mug of hot coffee in his hand and looked towards the entrance. The next moment, he threw away the half-drunk coffee and ran there, cursing. Approaching the students, the man shouted for them to immediately move aside. But they stood still, not understanding what was happening. Jack moved behind them with lightning speed and pushed them aside, after which he created a tunfei blocking the enemy's attack. Having difficulty holding back the onslaught of the attacker, John shouted to all the students present to run to the emergency exit. The students themselves did not understand what was happening and were dumbfounded with fear, ignoring John's order. Noticing that everyone remained standing in their places, the man asked what they were doing, because they were ordered to run away from here as quickly as possible. At the same moment, his weapon began to become covered with deep cracks, unable to withstand the strength of the enemy. A couple of moments later, everyone saw how John was cut into two by an enemy unknown to them. Throwing the blood-stained sword over his shoulder, Douglas said that he was glad to meet with his comrades from South Korea. A terrifying aura emanated from this man, and the scar on half his face made him even more dangerous. A few moments later, two more guards came running here, and one of them asked Douglas who he was and what he needed here. The man ignored the question, telling the guard that he looked pretty tough and that he might be able to at least cheer Douglas up a little. Paul's partner said that the unknown person's accent was similar to North Korean. Based on these words, Paul asked the attackers if they were spies sent from the north. Douglas replied that today they are playing the role not of spies, but of beggars. After that, he threw a large bag on the floor, saying that if they did not want to lose their heads, then they had better hurry up and fill this bag with money. Paul was at a loss. He could not fulfill this request, but he was in no hurry to part with his life. A few moments later, reinforcements arrived. Realizing that they were not going to fulfill his polite request, Douglas said that they had better fill this bag with money while he asks for it in a good way. Paul shouted at the man to stop demanding the impossible and get out of here as far as possible. Raising his huge sword, Douglas said that to this day, he wonders whether the inhabitants of the southern part suffer from hearing or vision, since they dare to challenge him every time. Alicia was behind the guards all this time. Looking at Douglas, she realized that he had a fairly high rank, and they had absolutely nothing to oppose against such a monster. Paul created a wall of steel to fence off Douglas to allow his colleagues to get closer to the enemy and protect the school children who had become unwitting hostages of the situation. Alicia realized how reckless the man's action was and ran forward, shouting that he needed to get out of there. But she was too late. At the same moment, the wall built by Paul was destroyed in one blow. Alicia watched in horror as the guard's bloody body collapsed to the floor. Matt, standing nearby, staggered back, realizing that the man who could provide them with at least some safety was killed in a split second. The girl couldn't believe that Douglas dealt with an A-rank fighter so easily. She came to the conclusion that this man's rank was no lower than A rank, if not S. Douglas looked with contempt at the corpses lying nearby, saying that all attempts to maintain order were completely pointless. He then brushed the blood off his sword. Alicia attracted the attention of the rest of the students by shouting for everyone to obey her orders. She ordered everyone to run behind the banker's counters. Sean nodded his head, starting to rise from the floor. Watching the students run to the banker's desks, Douglas, standing at the coupon machine, asked if they had decided to become bank employees if he needed to take a coupon to get the money. Once on the other side of the hall, Alicia told everyone to activate their abilities, and from now on, the sergeants were in charge of their squads. Having never received an answer to his question, Douglas continuously pressed the button to receive a coupon, saying that he would like to get some money. The sound produced by this device greatly hurt the ears of our heroes. Jumping onto one of the tables, Alicia said that everyone should get together. They need to hold out until the police or teachers come to the rescue. Moving the bag a little closer, Douglas asked the school children not to be so inhospitable to their new friend, because they should support each other. Casting a glance at the man's people, Alicia was sure that in terms of strength, they were in no way inferior to Douglas. Meanwhile, the man continued his monologue, saying that their wallets were empty, so they wanted to ask the bank for help. But they encountered an inhospitable attitude in their direction, which made him very sad. Standing opposite Alicia, he inquired about the name of such a brave girl. When she told him her name, Douglas asked why she had been silent all this time, ignoring his concerns. Alicia decided that she needed to not only try to buy as much time as possible, but also try to get useful information out of him, so she said that the man did not look like a spy. They would not rob a bank, and she assumed that they had escaped from the North Korea. Douglas was amused by the girl's words and couldn't help but smile. Without removing the smile from his face, he said that he had better introduce himself. Alicia was surprised that the criminal decided to reveal his identity on his own. The next moment, the man announced that they were members of the Plague. The girl had previously heard about this group. She remembered that the location of their base had never been revealed. Members of this terrorist group opposed all humanity. Where their feet step, even insects do not survive. The only trace that the members of the Plague left behind them were piles of dead bodies and pools of blood. Others also knew about this group, no less than Alicia, which is why fear began to take hold of each of the students. Kicking his bag, Douglas said that since everyone understood everything, they should start filling his bag with money. One of the girls offered to fulfill his request and just give him the money. At that moment, Alicia stepped forward, activating her ability. Douglas looked at the girl with some delight. Alicia, on the contrary, was completely serious and, if necessary, planned to engage in battle with him. She told her classmates that they should calm down and pull themselves together. Alicia also said that no one said that they would be left alive after Douglas took his money. Examining the appearance of the girl standing in front of him, he remembered that he had heard about this ability before, but he was able to see its bearer live for the first time in his life. From his face, Alicia realized that he already knew about her family and invited the man to fight. She decided to use the chance given to her and convince Duke to fight one-on-one. The man grinned, guessing about the girl's plans. He said that she was quite smart, but he would not fall for such a pathetic trick. Spreading her arms to the sides, Alicia asked if Douglas wouldn't swarm over one student. The man laughed, after which he admitted that he liked her bravery, after which he accepted the girl's offer, ordering his men to move back with a gesture. When he asked if Alicia was as crazy as her predecessors, the girl replied that there was too much talking, after which she asked if they would fight or just scratch their tongues. Taking a more comfortable grip on his sword, Douglas said that her provocation was very sweet and he would gladly succumb to it. Pointing his sword at Alicia, the man told her to attack. Without revealing her excitement, the girl replied that it was very self-confident of him to give her such an honor. Looking at Douglas's subordinates standing a little further away, Alicia was sure that he would not break his promise to them, so if she could stay alive, if she could immobilize the man. The girl reached for her sword, but it was not there. Looking behind her and making sure that there was no weapon, the girl felt horror because without her sword, she would not be able to resist Douglas. The next moment, she remembered that she had left him during the break. When the man attacked her, she managed to lean back, escaping the attack. The wall behind it was destroyed by one blow from Douglas's sword. Alicia managed to hide for a couple of moments behind the debris. She understood that if not for her reaction speed, then she could have been in the place of this pile of stones. Alicia decided to use the fragments of the wall as her weapon, after which she jumped onto one of the fragments that was falling near Douglas, hoping to pin him to the floor. The man noticed her and turned around, cutting the fragment into small pieces, wondering where Alicia's former courage had gone, since she decided to attack on the sly. Cursing, the girl landed opposite her opponent. The man pointed the sword at her again, asking if she was sure that she was really a goblin and not a flying squirrel. Alicia managed to safely dodge all of his subsequent attacks. The other students watching their fight were amazed that Alicia was able to resist such a strong opponent. They began to support the girl, shouting her name and that she would succeed. Ethan at this time analyzed the current situation, thinking about how best to act. Lewis, who was sitting next to her, said with delight that Alicia was simply incredible to withstand the onslaught of such a monster as Douglas. Ethan put his hand on the guy's shoulder, saying that now was not the time for this. Hearing that they had to run, Lewis asked in confusion where to run. Looking at the ceiling, the hero replied that it was best for them to run upstairs, to the restroom, to the offices. They needed to hide where they could not be quickly found. Ethan was well aware that Alicia would not last long, so he decided that it would be better to try to hide the students. A few moments later, Douglas caught the girl by changing the trajectory of the sword and struck her. This sent Alicia flying to the side, hitting the wall hard. The man began to slowly approach her, dragging his huge sword along the floor. With a smile, he said that it was time for them to stop playing cat and mouse. When Alicia coughed up blood, the mood of the students watching her changed. They were horrified because their strongest student had lost. Pointing the blade of his sword at her, Duke asked if this was all Alicia was capable of. The girl replied that if he was so interested, then he should check it out himself. After her words, the man smiled bloodthirstily. At that moment, Ethan shouted for everyone to run towards the stairs. Douglas was about to finish off Alicia, raising his sword above her head, but the cry of our hero made the man freeze in surprise. Immediately after this, Ethan grabbed Lewis by the collar of his jacket and dragged him along. Everyone else ran after him. Michael was one of the first to run in the row. He was no less gripped by fear than the others. Looking back, he shouted to those lagging behind that they should not get caught if they wanted to live on, so everyone should hurry up. At the same time, Douglas scratched the back of his head, saying that the kids were smart and got caught. The subordinates who approached asked him if there would be an order about this. The man gave up, giving the order to catch all the children. His subordinates saluted, simultaneously replying that this order would be carried out. After that, they went up the stairs and divided into groups, several people per floor. Alicia suggested that since Douglas gave the order to just catch everyone, then he was not going to kill them. The girl decided to hold out for as long as she could, again standing opposite her opponent. Smiling, Douglas said he liked her tenacity. He asked if she wanted to join him. Alicia replied that she had no reason to switch sides. Grinning, the man advised her to think carefully about his proposal, because the girls were lining up for him. Alicia asked with confusion why she should believe some robber. Douglas realized that he had completely forgotten to introduce himself. Then he said his full name, Douglas Taylor. Alicia knew this name very well. The man in front of her was not only an outstanding politician in North Korea, but also the best military commander. Douglas said he's excited about rising to the top at such a young age, so he needs a talented woman by his side. Alicia was at a loss. She could not give a single compelling reason to explain why such an influential person came here in person. Noticing that the girl began to back away, Douglas sighed, sadly saying that it was for this reason that he usually did not reveal his identity. A slight trembling began to penetrate the girl's body, trying not to betray her fear in her voice. She said that such a person must have a good fortune and a lot of money. Smiling, Alicia said that with his money, she could treat all her friends to dinner at an expensive restaurant. Her words made Douglas laugh. He found the girl standing in front of him quite interesting. Looking at her, the man thought that meeting her was worth it to come here, carrying out an order to rob a bank with students inside. Pointing to himself, Douglas said that the winner of their fight had long been a foregone conclusion, and she had better be a little more polite to him while he was being kind. At this moment, Alicia had just reached the place where she had previously left her sword. Throwing her weapon with her foot, the girl said that she almost died trying to get it. When the sword was in her hand, the girl said that in future, she should take better care of her things. Afterwards, she began to slowly remove the inter from the sheath, releasing all her strength. Smiling, Alicia said that in order for Douglas to see what she was truly capable of, she would need a sword. At the same time, the students tried to escape from their pursuers. However, the military still managed to catch up and capture the terror-stricken students. They returned to the first floor, dragging the found children behind them. At the same time, Ethan and Lewis managed to successfully hide in one of the restroom stalls. He looked around and said with surprise that the banks were pretty good at keeping clean. Lewis asked excitedly if they should go even higher, since they were only on the 5th floor, while the others had gone higher. Sitting down on the toilet, Ethan replied that he needed some time to catch his breath. Looking at the hero, Lewis asked if he was okay. Ethan looked at him in surprise, replying that he was fine. Lewis remembered what happened to the guards on the 1st floor and was sure that if they were caught, they would suffer the same fate. He looked away, deciding not to voice his concerns, and simply said that it was better for them not to stay here for long, because they would be caught quickly. So Lewis took Ethan's hand, helping him up. Our hero thought that Alicia would be able to hold out for some more time. His assumptions about what would happen when Douglas finally had enough of playing were not rosy. Ethan pushed the guy's hand away, saying there was no point in running. He said that they needed to fight, which caused confusion in Lewis. The guy tried to reason with the hero, saying that it was better for them not to catch the eye of the military, because even the teachers could not oppose anything to these people, not to mention themselves, who have C and F ranks. Suddenly, Ethan asked Lewis if it was possible to divide souls by rank. Faced with a face full of incomprehension, the hero said that he once heard an entertaining story. He said that previously Alicia's fighting ability was only D rank, but now she has risen to A rank. Ethan explained that you shouldn't focus on just ranks, which can be improved through hard training. At the same time, one of Douglas's subordinates went up to the 5th floor, finding no one on the lower floors. Lewis asked why Ethan brought up the topic so suddenly. Hearing footsteps approaching, the guy panicked, saying that they had already been discovered. The man intended to check every room on the floor, but due to the noise coming from the toilet, most likely he would limit himself to only this room. Lewis said now is not the time to talk because they might be overheard. Ethan put his hand on his shoulder, asking him to listen to him. Approaching, the hero said that now Lewis should trust him and do what he says. The next moment, the man came inside, telling the students to leave because their conversations could be clearly heard even from the corridor. But his words were ignored and no one was going to go out. Then the man said that his boss didn't like slow people and they had better hurry up if they didn't want to anger him. After his words, Ethan looked out from behind the opened booth, saying that the man had a very interesting accent and asked to teach him to speak the same way. Thomas told the guy to stop being a fool. Douglas wouldn't mind if Ethan had one of his arms or legs broken. Standing opposite the man, the hero noted that without the presence of his boss, the man seemed much more talkative. The next moment, he created a dagger. Then he pointed it at Thomas, standing opposite him. Grinning, the man asked if his ability was really so insignificant. The next moment, using acceleration, Thomas ran towards Ethan, saying that he had better give up. The hero turned to Lewis, saying that he must escape at the first opportunity. Approaching Ethan, Thomas said that they had nowhere to run because they were both trapped. After his words, the hero stopped holding back, releasing all his power. Like last time, all of Ethan's characteristics became 3 times higher. Before this, Thomas, who was moving at high speed, became much slower, which allowed the hero to calculate the trajectory of the enemy's strike. Dodging his fist, Ethan said that the man was too slow. Standing next to this guy, small tremors began to break through his body. Thomas did not understand what was happening. The next moment, Ethan struck his opponent so quickly that he did not have time to react. During this, he laughed like crazy, saying that he was very sorry. Thomas grabbed Ethan's hand and said that the guy was just crazy. The hero just smiled, looking appraisingly at the man, after which he said that it is quite convenient to be able to accelerate up to 100 meters per second. Thomas asked in bewilderment if Ethan could really see other people's abilities. The guy replied that everything could happen, after which, with a look full of madness, he asked if he should cut off the man's ankles. He wondered what would happen to a person if the means of manifestation of his soul essence was destroyed, and then struck the man in the shoulder. The more blood was on him, the more madness took over Ethan. The toy in his hands was too interesting, and he wanted to play with it fully, experimenting with what would happen if he hit this or that point on Thomas's body. Lewis, who was still in the booth, watched in horror what was happening, not believing his eyes. A massive tremor ran through his body, and he unconsciously began to step back, whispering Ethan's name. Hearing his name, the hero was distracted from his toy. Lewis froze as the hero looked at him with a look of madness. Ethan asked if Lewis called him. Noticing the horror reflected on the guy's face, the hero asked what exactly he was so scared of. Overcoming himself, Lewis left the booth, his voice trembling, saying that Ethan needed to run away as quickly as possible. The hero was amused by his words. He replied that Lewis was mistaken here and asked who, in his opinion, it was really time to leave here. He slowly stood up, holding Thomas's limp body. Ethan kept his eyes on Lewis the whole time, waiting for his answer. The guy could not utter a word from the fear that shackled him. For several long moments, Ethan looked at Lewis standing opposite him. Suddenly, the madness receded and consciousness returned to our hero. At the same moment, a severe headache struck him. Ethan shook his head from side to side, trying to suppress his crazy side, causing his glasses to fly off to the floor. The next moment, the guy again grabbed the still conscious Thomas by the collar of his jacket. With all his might, Ethan shouted for Lewis to run away from here as quickly as possible. The guy flinched when the hero said that the essence of his ability, turning his hands into a blade, meant that Lewis's body could not be destroyed. Ethan advised him to think about it. Swallowing, Lewis complied with Ethan's request and ran towards the exit. After this, the hero exhaled with relief, saying that now he does not need to worry about witnesses. Thomas laughed and twirled his finger at his temple, saying that the guy had definitely gone crazy. Looking up at the man again with eyes full of madness, Ethan said that he would still have to carry out plan number 13. The man did not understand at all what this guy was talking about and thought that he definitely needed to report to his boss about this psycho. However, his plans were not destined to come true because the next moment Ethan cut his throat. At the same time, Alicia felt much more confident when she finally had a sword in her hands. Douglas studied the girl's weapon with interest, saying that this sword matches her pretty face. Placing the sword in front of her, Alicia replied that he would change his mind after the first blow. Getting into a fighting position, Douglas asked if she was really so sure that she could defeat him. The next moment, he attacked the girl. Alicia blocked his blow with her sword. Douglas looked at her with eyes full of surprise. Smiling, the girl answered his question that her victory was already obvious. Alicia aroused more and more interest in him. Returning to the original stance, Douglas asked if she really did not recognize his abilities. Looking at her sword, he had a hunch that it was somehow weakening his ability. Douglas said that Alicia has a strange sword. The girl replied that many people told her that she robbed her family by taking this sword. She said that it was created specifically for fighting strong opponents. Thanks to the constellations printed on the blade, the sword has the power of stars, thanks to which the owner, having a high level of sword skills, can destroy an opponent of A rank and higher. Having finished her story, the girl attacked the man. The next moment, her doubles appeared on either side of Douglas. He laughed, saying that Alicia was quite an interesting opponent and asked again if she wanted to join him. The girl replied that her opinion had not changed at all since last time. Raising his sword above his head, Douglas said that it would be a shame to kill Alicia now, when he had not yet fully enjoyed their battle. Then he attacked the girl along with her doubles. Alicia managed to cover herself with her sword, flying to the side. But her doubles, having hit Douglas's attack, began to disappear. The man did not give Alicia time to rest, and immediately made another attack in her direction. The girl blocked his attack with her sword, but Douglas's pressure was too strong. The next moment, the man applied even more force, forcing the girl to fly to the side, after which he said that he was superior to her in strength. Grabbing her sword tighter, Alicia said that he had too much ego and ran towards Douglas. Approaching him, Alicia again created two doubles. They all attacked the man at once, who didn't even move when she used the technique again. Douglas struck fast and hard, getting rid of Alicia's doubles. The girl hoped that her doubles would be able to distract the man's attention, giving her a chance to attack when Douglas was open. But this plan failed. Her doubles disappeared too quickly, and Alicia found herself again alone with her opponent. Jumping back, Douglas said that he was starting to like her more and more. Alicia was no longer so confident in herself. Her opponent turned out to be stronger than she had expected. Douglas asked the girl if she still thinks that she is stronger than him. Without waiting for her answer, he said that what was shown should have been enough to convince Alicia to join him. Taking a stance, the girl replied that this was not enough for her. At the same moment, the military entered through the main entrance, dragging the escaped students with them. Alicia was surprised that during this time they had already managed to catch someone. Noticing that they appeared from the street, the girl assumed that all the police had come here because of such noise, but they could not do anything because of the hostages. Douglas asked why his subordinates only brought children from the street if they had previously gone to the upper floors. One of the men reported that they were divided into two teams, one of which carried out a raid on the upper floors, and the other waited outside the building to catch students jumping from the windows. He also reported that those who had not yet returned went up to the upper floors to look for those remaining. Alicia was very surprised when she heard that the men immediately went outside, and during all this time, the police did not make a single attempt to save the hostages. The current situation seemed too strange to her. Looking at Alicia, Douglas said that all her thoughts were written on her face. Throwing the sword over his shoulder, he said that all her assumptions about why the police had not arrived yet would be incorrect, because they had temporarily closed this bank using their abilities. When Douglas said this, it was as if she had been doused with a bucket of cold water. Meanwhile, the man continued, explaining that he would not carry out an attack without proper preparation, although the outside of the bank looks the same as usual, but no one will guess what is really happening inside. Alicia found it difficult to believe that there was not a single person from outside who could help them. Previously, she thought that it would be enough to just hold out until the police arrived. But now the situation has changed greatly. Even if she manages to escape to bring help here, by the time she returns, everyone else will have been killed. The girl clenched her sword. She realized that it was now useless to stall for time further by fighting, but Alicia didn't know what else she could do in this situation. Looking at her, Douglas asked where her former warrior spirit had gone. One of the bank employees, who was captured along with his students, kept looking warily at the leader. Suddenly, he stood up and used his ability to run forward. He managed to get to the nearest table with the phone in a matter of seconds. Picking up the phone, Matt pressed the emergency call button. Then he asked for security, saying that their bank had been captured by terrorists. Saying this, the man turned around, looking at the invaders, who for some reason unknown to him did not try to stop him. There was no response from the receiver to his messages. Matt excitedly asked if anyone could hear him. Silence again became his answer. Then the man realized that for some reason, the connection was blocked. At that moment, Douglas approached and threw the bag on the table in front of Matt. Smirking, he asked if Matt had not heard his conversation with a young lady a few minutes ago. The man fell to his knees in fear of Douglas, who in turn explained that among his subordinates, there was one who specialized in isolation, which meant that neither the phones nor the emergency call button worked. After his words, Michael and Sean took out their phones and saw that there really was no connection. Matt asked why someone as important as Douglas would break into a bank in broad daylight. Tilting his head to the side, he replied that a man should not belittle his position because all professions are equally important. Not paying attention to his words, Matt shouted that if the special forces found out about his whereabouts here, then Douglas would be in trouble. Smiling, Douglas replied that the fact of the matter was that no one would be able to find out anything because of the isolation, which he had already talked about twice. After this, the man's gaze became more bloodthirsty, and a terrifying aura began to emanate from him. Matt froze in horror, realizing that he was about to be killed. The next moment, the sharp blade of Douglas's sword was pointed at him. The man said it was time for Matt to learn an important lesson. after which Douglas raised his sword over his head. At that moment, Alicia shouted at him to stop, calling him a monster. The man froze in surprise at her words. Turning to her, he asked if he really heard it wrong, and she really just called him a monster. Alicia suggested that they fight again to determine the true winner. She sincerely hoped that Douglas would agree and leave the man alone. However, contrary to her expectations, he replied that the girl had already suggested this to him earlier, after which he asked if she understood the meaning of the words she had said earlier. Raising his sword above his head, Douglas said she didn't have to answer. The next moment, he cut off Matt's leg, causing him to start screaming in severe pain. Alicia took a step back, watching such a terrifying scene. Ignoring Matt's pleas for mercy, Douglas raised his hand for another blow and said that if she knew what her words meant, she would never have called him that. The next moment, Matt's screams stopped, and the floor and walls were stained with the man's blood. Alicia closed her eyes at the last moment, not wanting to witness such cruelty. A few moments later, Matt's severed head flew near the girl. She opened her eyes when she heard something fall and, holding back a scream, took a few steps back. Douglas pointed the sword at her, saying that since she decided to challenge him a second time, he would not be as courteous to her as before, but would simply cut off her legs and arms, after which he would carry them with him in a bag. He said that he would do Alicia great honor by giving her death by his hand. Suddenly, the door leading to the stairs opened, making a loud sound. Everyone in the room turned their gaze in that direction. The next moment, Lewis came out with his hands up. Douglas turned to him and asked who he was. One of the subordinates came forward saying that he would immediately grab the stranger, but Douglas stopped him. Lewis felt very uncomfortable being under so many eyes studying him. He thought that Ethan had been wrong in his assumptions, saying that it would be hell when he warned him about the situation on the first floor. Looking at the students trembling in fear and the pools of blood on the floor, Lewis was sure that this situation was much worse than just hell. In the bathroom stall before Thomas walked in, Ethan told Lewis to run to the first floor as soon as he activated his ability and tell everyone that he was here. The guy asked in bewilderment how he could leave Ethan alone in such a dangerous situation. Smiling, the hero asked Lewis to just trust him. Now he was on the first floor, and all he had to do was reveal Ethan's location in order to fulfill his request. When Douglas asked the guy to introduce himself, he gave his name and said that he was a 10th grader from medical school, after which he said that all the money was on the 5th floor. Grinning, Douglas asked if the safe was really located in such a strange place. Lewis explained that his friend had moved everything there earlier. The man was alarmed by the guy's words about this strange friend. Without turning around, he asked his subordinates why those who went upstairs to look for students had not yet returned. Looking at the fighters standing behind him, Douglas asked menacingly why they were standing here doing nothing while a child was walking around the floors of the building. One of the subordinates sat down on one knee in front of his commander, bowing his head. He said that he would check everything himself and bring the child here. As Douglas approached him, lowering his sword near his leg, Joshua began to beg the man for a chance to correct his mistake. Douglas laid his hand on the trembling subordinate and said that he was lucky that his hands were already stained today, after which he ordered the last student to be brought here, taking the money with him. Joshua immediately stood up and saluted, thanking his commander for the service rendered to him. Turning around, Douglas looked at the rest of his subordinates, saying that they too would go along with Joshua and warned that he would not be so merciful if another mistake was made. Then he turned his gaze to Lewis. The guy flinched when faced with Douglas's gaze, which did not bode well. The man asked if he was going to go up with the others or if he should do it himself. Sighing, Lewis replied that he would go up to the 5th floor, accompanied by Douglas's men. Having received his answer, the man smiled, praising the guy for making the right choice, after which he approached the students sitting on the floor, saying that while his subordinates were busy with his friend, he would also have a little fun here. The next moment, Douglas pointed at Alicia and asked if everyone could see her clearly. Without waiting for an answer, he said that he would leave alive the one who brought him her leg or arm. Douglas was interested to know what they would do next. After the man's words, the faces of Alicia's classmates became whiter than a sheet. Clenching her fists and lowering her head, Erica asked if they should really go against Alicia. Douglas smiled as he watched the seeds of doubt begin to form in the students' minds. Catherine, sitting nearby, asked how soon could Erica dare to think about something like that when Alicia had been fighting for them from the very beginning, risking her life. Erica looked at Douglas and replied that now the situation has changed and everyone has known the winner for a long time, and besides, it will depend on him who will be left alive. Suddenly, Douglas asked if anyone had a watch, saying he would start the timer because he was tired of waiting. After his words, the two guys said that they simply had no choice, and Alicia had a wealthy family that could provide her with a good life even without a pair of limbs. The girl herself was very unpleasant to listen to such words, but she perfectly understood that their lives were at stake. Lewis suddenly walked up to her. Alicia asked indifferently what he needed. The guy whispered that she shouldn't worry, she just needed to hold out a little longer. The girl looked at him in surprise, asking what this meant. But Lewis only smiled back at her. Alicia said that he should have stayed in his hiding place further, because now the opponents had one more hostage. The guy replied that he had come to help. Hearing his words, everyone else looked at Lewis as if he was crazy. One of the men, a former bank employee, scornfully asked if the guy wanted his hand in gratitude. Lewis ignored the question and turned to Alicia. He smiled and said that he and Ethan were now best friends. The next moment, Douglas destroyed one of the nearby tables, drawing attention to himself. Rubbing his neck, he said wearily that he would kill everyone here if he was kept waiting too long. The next moment, trembling with fear, everyone began to apologize to Alicia, saying that she should understand them. Without taking their eyes off the girl, they said that they simply had no other choice. Douglas turned to Lewis, asking whose side he was on. Smiling awkwardly, he replied that he would take Alicia's side. The man grinned and then said that in this case he would also need part of this guy's body as payment for saving one life. Everyone looked at each other excitedly when they heard that the number of those who could survive had increased to 10. Lewis smiled awkwardly, asking Alicia if she could protect both of them. The girl called out to Douglas, calling him a North Korean puppet. The man turned around, asking how long she would continue to address him so disrespectfully. Alicia ignored his question, asking what would happen if she simply killed all the hostages. Would he then leave her and Lewis alive? She argued that everyone should have a chance to survive. The next moment, Douglas's booming laughter was heard in the room. He said that Alicia was saying some pretty funny things. He accepted her offer, promising that he would leave them alive. Alicia clenched her sword, pointing it at the students standing opposite her. Seeing that she was serious, they cowered in fear. The girl said that she too had no other choice but to stay alive in this way. Catherine looked uncertainly from Alicia to Douglas. The man, smiling bloodthirstily, asked what everyone was waiting for. They just needed to choose, namely, a part of Alicia and Lewis's body or their own heads. Catherine turned back, saying that in such a situation it would be fair to save the majority. She tried to convince Alicia, saying that it was too selfish of her to kill them all for 2 lives. Alicia replied that she had no other choice. Then she created clones and ran towards Catherine. The girl activated her ability, creating a shock glove. As she approached, Alicia told her to fight with all her might. The next moment, she pointed the blade of the sword at Catherine. She clenched her fist, gathering all her strength. The next moment, her fist collided with Alicia's sword. As soon as the double was dispelled, the real Alicia appeared in front of the girl. Catherine pulled back, not understanding what had just happened. Pulling her towards her, Alicia delivered a powerful blow to her opponent's stomach. The next moment, she whispered in Catherine's ear so that she would listen carefully. Then she asked the girl for a favor. Catherine's eyes widened in surprise. When she finished, Alicia threw the girl towards the other hostages. Catherine showed no signs of life, lying unconscious. Everyone began to discuss the fight they had just seen. After looking at Lewis, they decided that he would be easier to defeat than Alicia. Hearing their plan, the girl sighed heavily. The next moment, she stepped forward, telling Lewis to stay behind her. Watching this, Douglas could not hold back another burst of laughter, hiding his face with his hands. Raising his head, he said that this spectacle was becoming more and more exciting. Not everyone in this room shared his opinion. They had to desperately cling to life, playing by the rules of this crazy man. Alicia stood with her sword pointed towards her opponents, ready to fend off their attack if they dared to attack her. Douglas, having recovered from his fit of laughter, shouted for them to amuse him even more by killing each other. At that moment, an empty Coca-Cola can flew past him, attracting the man's attention. He turned around with a murderous look and asked what it was. However, there was no one behind him, only an open door leading to the stairs. Ethan, who threw the can, stood a little further from the entrance, so that he would not be noticeable. He smiled bloodthirstily, glad that everything was going according to his plan. Douglas picked up the can, trying to figure out where it came from. Looking at this half-Coke can, Lewis immediately knew who exactly threw it there. The next moment, the man turned around and threw the can, so that it bounced and fell near the door. Douglas noticed the silhouette of a man at the entrance, and grinning, asked if he was Lewis's mysterious friend. Instead of answering, the guy attacked the man. Douglas dodged the weapon thrown at him, after which he irritably asked if he was suicidal for deciding to attack him in such a way. However, when the man looked down to understand what exactly he was attacked with, he froze in place. He saw that it was torn pieces from the masks of his subordinates, whom he had sent to explore the upper floors. Douglas looked in surprise again towards the door, where a young man unknown to him had stood a few seconds ago, but he disappeared as suddenly as he had appeared. He had absolutely no idea what was happening here. Grabbing his sword, Douglas thought that the boy had made a mistake by underestimating his opponent. The next moment, he slashed the air with his sword, putting all his strength into this blow. No one understood why Douglas launched powerful attacks, cutting through the air above him. A few moments later, he stopped and the ceiling suddenly began to collapse. Everyone watched in horror as the collapsed part of the ceiling fell on their heads. Alicia ran to the center of the room, where the ceiling collapsed, creating clones along the way. She made it in time and managed, together with her clones, to hold this concrete layer over the heads of the hostages, before anyone could get hurt. Douglas, without the slightest surprise in his voice, noted that the girl was very strong, after which he asked to be patient a little, because he still needed to meet someone. Alicia looked at him with hatred, not believing that he was actually going to kill them all. Having come to his senses, he looked at the girl and said that if even one person moves, everyone will die. As soon as the hostages relaxed and were glad that everyone was saved, Douglas again knocked the air out of their lungs. Turning around, the man added that now is the perfect moment to cut off Alicia's limbs. He advised them to carefully consider his words. At that moment, the girl asked if he really thought that she would just stand there and wait until she was dismembered. With a mocking grin on his face, the man replied that if everything was different, she would not be standing now with a heavy canvas on her shoulders, after which he said that he needed to leave for a while. Immediately after this, he jumped into the passage he had made in the ceiling, flying through floor after floor. Alicia and the rest of the students remained in their places, afraid to even move. Suddenly, the girl said that she wouldn't last long, and if they didn't want to die, then everyone should come out from under this broken ceiling. Lewis ran up to the girl and shouted that everyone should really get out of there. However, a woman who came forward stopped the guy, saying that if everyone came out, they risked dying at Alicia's hand in the future. Sean, who was sitting in the trap, shouted out that otherwise, if they stayed here, this block would crush them to death. Michael approached Lewis, saying that he should move away, because earlier Alicia said that she would kill them all, so now they have a great chance to do it first. Lewis asked in bewilderment if no one saw how she rushed to save people. He tried to explain to everyone that Alicia did not really intend to kill anyone, because if this were not so, she would not be standing now, holding the collapsed ceiling. He suggested joining forces and running to the exit, even if enemies were waiting for them outside. Together they could break through. Michael interrupted him by asking what would happen to them if Douglas decided to return at that moment. Catherine, who had come to her senses, intervened in their argument. The girl looked at Alicia, who was holding on with all her strength. At the same time, Ethan heard footsteps behind him and turned around, saying that his guest was a little late. After looking around, Douglas asked if there was anyone else here besides them. It was difficult for him to believe that some schoolboy had dealt with a squad of his best fighters alone. Noticing that the man was staring intently at the corpses of his people, Ethan said that he had to have fun with them for a long time. With a look full of madness, the guy said that he would have managed it faster if they had attacked him with the whole crowd at the same time. Smiling widely, the man thought that the girl he had fought with earlier had impressed him greatly, but the guy standing in front of him was able to completely outshine her. Douglas wondered where this monster came from. Ethan ignored his question and ran his index finger along the blade of his dagger with a bloodthirsty smile on his face. Douglas extended his hand to the guy, asking if he wanted to join him. He even promised Ethan a good position if he accepted his offer. After his words, the hero put his palm to his face, carefully thinking about something. A few moments later, he broke into a happy smile, saying that it would be best to take the ninth path. Immediately after that, he took off, approaching Douglas in a zigzag pattern. The man stood up when the guy was close enough. Catching the right moment, Douglas attacked Ethan, but he dodged his sword. The man made several more attempts, but the hero never fell under a single blow, jumping from side to side. Then, Douglas decided to show the guy one of his trump cards, using one of the strongest attacks in his arsenal. However, this time our hero safely escaped the attack, moving behind his opponent. Douglas did not expect that he would catch the guy with his last attack, because it was made for a completely different purpose. Seeing Ethan running towards him, the man grinned, thinking that the boy had fallen into his trap. No one knew that his ability allowed the sword to pass through surfaces. When the man activated his ability, Ethan had the opportunity to study it, quickly approaching his opponent. Once at a sufficient distance, the smiling hero said that Douglas had a rather long name for his ability. The man froze for a couple of moments, not understanding how this brat knew about his ability. This hesitation was enough for Ethan to push off from the sword and jump behind Douglas, simultaneously asking why the name was so long. The man did not move, trying to understand what had just happened. Having landed not far from him, the hero did not stop bombarding the man with questions. With his back to him, Douglas lowered the sword raised above his head. He asked Ethan if he was able to see the abilities of other people, to which he received a positive answer. When the guy asked why he had several pluses near his rank, and what the gain factor was, the man shuddered. He asked what the annoying brat's name was. The hero, with a crazy expression on his face, said his name, drawing out the syllables. After this, Douglas asked whether his ability was related to vision, and said that if he really could see the ranks and abilities of people, then Ethan would have no equal in his squad. The hero interrupted the man, saying that Douglas was the strongest person he had met recently. The man did not understand why he suddenly started talking about this, and asked once again if the guy wanted to join him. Completely ignoring Douglas's words, after staring closely at the man, Ethan said with displeasure that he only saw 9. Not understanding what the guy meant, the man asked what else he could see. The hero replied that he saw only 9 ways to kill him. The man was surprised that this guy could even do such things. Covering his face with his palm, he said that he was jealous of Ethan. Taking the dagger more comfortably, the hero said that 1 way would be enough for him to kill his opponent. Grinning, the man said that he was very sorry that their negotiations ended so quickly, after which they rushed at each other with bloodthirsty smiles. At the same time, Glenn was hiding in the control room. He deliberately disabled the elevator so that he would not be found so quickly. He reasoned that this building was located in the city center, so a simple call would be enough, and the police would immediately rush here. The guy decided to sit here longer because he could get into trouble if he left his shelter too early. Ethan raced towards Douglas with a crazy smile. He read all the man's attacks and dodged them with ease. Now Ethan disappeared right from under Douglas's nose, quite angering the man. He looked up and saw that this guy was sitting on the blade of his sword. Ethan smiled contentedly. He enjoyed pissing off his victims. Gritting his teeth, the man shouted that the hero only knows how to dodge, after which he told him to attack. Ethan complied with his request. He jumped towards Douglas, aiming a dagger at his right eye. When the sharp blade almost caught up with him, the man managed to dodge at the last second. The hero flew past the man, landing a few meters away from him. Douglas managed to avoid losing his eye, but the guy managed to wound him in the shoulder. Ethan wasn't about to give the man time to rest, so he attacked his opponent again, surprising him. The hero rushed past the man at high speed, once again inflicting a deep cut on him. Ethan was not going to stop with just 2 wounds on the man's body, continuing his high-speed attacks. Covering himself with a sword from Ethan's attacks, Douglas realized that all this time the guy was just having fun, mistaking him for a toy. During one of the next attacks, the hero asked in a bored voice if he would wait for an attack from his opponent in return. Then he stopped in front of the man, saying that he was already bored with their game and it was time to end. Smirking, Douglas said that if he continues to hide his main trump card, he will definitely die here. The next moment, the man extended his hand to Ethan, who noticed that it was shrouded in something strange. His eyes widened in surprise. He did not expect that Douglas would have such a surprise in store. He understood that if the man touched him, it would be bad, so the hero jumped back with lightning speed. Once at a safe distance, Ethan carefully examined the man standing opposite, whose hand was enveloped in strange tentacles. The guy asked in bewilderment where Douglas got 2 abilities, since a person can only have no more than 1, because everyone has only 1 soul. He tried to determine the level of this strange ability of the man, but all information about it was blocked. Ignoring his question, Douglas said that speed would no longer help Ethan. The hero asked where his opponent got such a strange hand. Smirking, he asked why he was so interested in this. Ethan suggested that Douglas had become stronger with the help of this hand, after which he smiled bloodthirstily and said that now the real fun would finally begin. Pointing at Ethan, the man told him to stop being a jerk because if he kept fighting like this, he would end up without a scratch. When the hero asked in surprise if Douglas was going to run away from him, the man smiled bloodthirstily, answering that he had not heard these words for a long time. Ethan asked how his opponent decided to escape from him. Smirking, Douglas replied that he had 1 way in stock, after which he squeezed his sword tighter, saying that he would remember such an interesting opponent. The next moment, he pointed his sword upward and, using his ability, began to cut his way out. A few moments later, the roof of the bank building was breached. When this happened, the walls of the building shook as if from an earthquake. There was a huge hole in the roof, running through most of the bank's floors. Hearing a loud sound, Glenn came out of his shelter and froze in shock when he saw the floor and ceiling pierced through. He walked closer and looked down, thinking that Alicia couldn't do something like that, so it was most likely Douglas's doing. As soon as the passage was ready, the man jumped up. Watching him, Ethan asked if Douglas wanted to play hide and seek with him. The hero happily said that he liked this idea and would also join the man. Looking over his shoulder at him, Douglas said that he should stop joking, because just anyone could rise to such a height. However, the next moment, Ethan jumped after him, flying several floors and ending up near Douglas. Looking at the approaching guy, the man thought that if he didn't quickly get away from here, he could really get hurt. At the same moment, he noticed Glenn on the top floor, looking at him in surprise. Smiling, Douglas said that luck was on his side today. The next moment he jumped onto the roof, Glenn did not immediately notice the guy chasing the man. When he recognized him as Ethan, he was surprised to ask what he was doing here. Instead of answering, the hero rushed at Glenn, completely forgetting about Douglas. He was delighted at the appearance of another new toy. At that moment, the hero's consciousness became clouded for several moments, and he simply flew near his stunned classmate. He looked behind himself in surprise, watching how Ethan, who had just been burning with the desire to kill him, was now lying on the floor. When he fell, he hit himself quite hard so he could not get up immediately. Glenn ran up to him and asked the lying guy where he came from here. Watching them, Douglas asked the blonde guy if he knew this crazy man. Turning around, Glenn asked the man what happened, because he had recently fought with Alicia. However, he was in no hurry to tell this boy anything, drawing some conclusions in his head. Having never received an answer from Douglas, Glenn tried to independently understand what happened here. When he was struck by the strange thought that Ethan had forced such a strong opponent to flee, the guy immediately brushed it aside, denying even the possibility of its existence. He turned to the hero, irritably asking what happened here. At the same moment, Ethan's madness again captured his mind. Glenn noticed that something was wrong with him and took a couple of steps back. Instinctively, he felt the danger emanating from him. Douglas also noticed that the boy with whom he fought had returned to his previous state. Calling out to Glenn, he thanked him for drawing the attention of this psycho to himself. He looked at the man with confusion, asking what he meant. Douglas again did not answer his question, only said that he always remembers those who helped him. After which he smiled and quietly said that even if the assistant himself did not realize the service provided. Glenn was completely confused, and Douglas's words confused him even more. Rising to his feet, the man advised him to run to the first floor as soon as possible, if he, of course, wanted to stay alive. The guy looked at Douglas with a stunned face, not noticing the approaching steps from behind. When the man jumped in an unknown direction, Glenn shouted after him that he was not going to fall into this trap, knowing full well that Douglas's people would be waiting for him on the first floor. Smirking, the man simply wished the boy good luck. He was glad that he followed his instinct and decided to go south. Still not understanding anything, Glenn looked at Ethan, whose behavior was too strange. The next moment, Ethan stood up straight and looked at Glenn with a manic expression on his face. Approaching him, the hero asked, drawing out the syllables, what the leader of the squad was doing here. Tilting his head to the side, Ethan said that Glenn had allowed his toy to escape, so he would have to take that role. The way Ethan looked at him made Glenn recoil, beginning to understand the meaning of Douglas's words. The guy turned around and looking at the hole made in the floor, thought that if he didn't run away now, then this wouldn't end well. The next moment, he used his ability to pull out one of the stones and jumped down. He glanced over his shoulder to make sure Ethan hadn't followed him. The hero stood near the hole watching the retreating guy. Smiling even wider, he said that he was again taking the role of water in this game. The next moment, he flew after his leader, moving in a zigzag motion. A few moments later, he managed to catch up with Glenn, saying that he was already tired of this game and suggested that he play something else. Turning around, Glenn tried to hit Ethan, yelling at him to get away from him, but he easily dodged. The hero stared at the guy for a couple of seconds. He had seen over 15 ways to kill Glenn and was trying to figure out which one would be the most fun. Having chosen the most suitable one, he smiled bloodthirstily, pronouncing the name of his squad leader. The next moment, he approached the guy, grabbing him by the throat. Glenn asked Ethan to let him go, while at the same time trying to unhook his hand from his neck. Ignoring his requests, the hero said that he had come up with a new game for them called Cut Off an Arm or Cut Off a Leg. Hearing Ethan's proposal, Glenn shouted that he was a complete nutcase. Then he waved his hand, which was holding a huge stone, forcing the hero to let go, after which he told him to play his own games. Pressing himself against the destroyed ceiling, Ethan replied that he did not really like this proposal. The next moment, he pushed off from the surface and flew after the leader. The guy watched in horror as Ethan approached him at breakneck speed. Suddenly, he felt someone else's arms grab him. Still with the same smile, Ethan said that it was quite difficult to keep up with the leader. But now he was not going anywhere. Glenn tried to unhook this psycho from himself, but all his attempts were unsuccessful. Not knowing what else he could do, the guy said that if Ethan didn't let him go, they would both fall to death. Pressing himself even closer to Glenn, the hero said that he would not die. Suddenly, the leader of our hero's squad heard a familiar voice calling out to him from below. Gritting his teeth, Glenn thought that preserving his pride was not the most important thing now when his life was at stake. The next moment, he clenched his fist, concentrating all his strength. Then he pointed his fist at Ethan's face, saying that he did not intend to die at his hands. Ethan dodged his blow, saying that Glenn was too slow. The next moment, he noticed a sword flying at him. When the blade was a few centimeters from his face, he smiled, saying that someone else wanted to play with them. The next moment, he threw the sword aside. Glenn looked at the guy in bewilderment, trying to understand how he managed it. A couple of seconds later, he looked ahead, shouting for the girl standing there to move aside. After waiting a little time, he threw the stone he was holding down. Glenn himself flew several metros to the side. Ethan landed after him. Rising to his feet, he looked in the direction where his next toy should have been. However, instead of a person, he found in this place the sword with which he had been attacked earlier. Grinning, he said that today all his toys like to play hide and seek. At the same time, Alicia was still standing, holding the collapsed ceiling. Although she tried to pretend that everything was in order, but from the girl's trembling hands, one could understand that she was at the limit. Alicia tried to come up with some way out, but all her ideas led to a tragic end for either her or those she was now protecting. At the same moment, Catherine stepped forward, activating her ability. Without taking her eyes off Alicia, the girl created a strike glove. Those behind her called out to her, saying that they should do it first. Lewis desperately tried to stop Catherine and the others from making a mistake. However, none of his words and prayers helped. They began to threaten him, saying that if he did not leave, he would suffer himself. Despite this, the guy stood his ground, asking if they were tormented by their conscience for their intentions towards Alicia, who had been fighting for them all this time. The bank employee replied that Lewis was still too young and did not understand much. She was obliged to survive by any means for the sake of her family and children. Alicia could no longer hold on, experiencing severe pain throughout her body. The students sitting under the collapsed ceiling began to scream in fear as the ceiling began to fall. Catherine said that Alicia is at the end of her strength. She demanded that Lewis immediately step aside, ceasing to protect the girl who was struggling to hold the ceiling. The guy also activated his ability, saying that if Catherine gets one step closer to them, he will have to attack. Sighing and clenching her fist, the girl replied that in this case, she had no choice. The next moment, she turned around, ordering her squad to start rescuing people from the ceiling and stand up for their comrade. Everyone looked at Catherine in bewilderment. Moments later, the members of the first squad stepped forward, following their leader's orders. They stood behind Catherine, blocking Alicia and Lewis. Alicia told Catherine to stop showing off in front of everyone and rushed to help her deal with the problem on her shoulders. Michael and the bank employee couldn't believe that anyone else would take Alicia's side. The woman stepped forward, saying that the best thing to do would be to sacrifice 2 people and get out of here alive, but she was stopped by Catherine. The girl said that if anyone else came close, she would have to use force. The bank employee raised her hands in a gesture of surrender and took several steps back. A few moments later, Anna said that all the students had been removed from the ceiling and that Alicia now needed to be carefully freed. Immediately after this, Lewis and Catherine destroyed the ceiling, relieving the girl of her heavy burden. Kneading her joints, Alicia said with relief that she had finally gotten out. Lewis approached her and asked the girl to explain everything to him. Alicia touched Catherine's shoulder, replying that she simply trusted her comrades. After her words, Lewis looked at Catherine in confusion. The girl said that in the moment before Alicia hit her, she reminded them of what they were taught at school and asked them to pretend to be scared. Immediately after that, Alicia pushed her back. As she took a sitting position, the girl thought that she had actually forgotten what they were taught due to extreme fear. They were told that members of the plague never leave witnesses of their atrocities alive. Remembering this, she realized that even if they killed Alicia or Lewis, Douglas still would not leave everyone else alive. Catherine approached her squad, saying that she had something to tell them. Having outlined the situation, the girl said that in the future, whatever she ordered, they must carry it out without question. When Catherine finished her explanation, Alicia said disgruntledly that she had asked her to just pretend that she was scared and not to start showing off. Suddenly, they heard a loud sound and then felt the building shake. Looking up, Alicia asked in bewilderment who Douglas was fighting there. At the same moment, Lewis, having come to his senses, shouted out Ethan's name, which is why the girl looked at him with incomprehension. Trying to explain to her what was happening, the guy asked if she remembered the reason why Douglas went upstairs. The girl replied that someone lured him there. Grabbing Alicia by the shoulders, he said that it was Ethan. When he said this, the girl looked at him as if he were crazy. Pushing the guy away from her, she said that Lewis shouldn't joke like that. Even though Ethan has good endurance and reaction speed, he is still F rank. Lewis asked with a serious face who else besides Ethan. It could be if everyone else except him and Glenn were here. But the leader of the third squad would not be able to fight back against Douglas. He then pointed towards the hole in the ceiling, saying that they should hurry up. Looking at the girl's shocked face and the lack of any reaction to his words that they needed to rush to Ethan's aid, Lewis turned around and ran towards the stairs alone. Alicia looked at the guys retreating back, not believing that Ethan had actually entered into a fight with Douglas, but judging by Lewis's face, he definitely wasn't joking. Although she understood everything with her mind, It went against the usual image of Ethan. The girl got angry when she thought that the guy might die at the hands of an enemy that even she could not cope with, and involuntarily activated her ability. The next moment she approached the surprised Catherine. Alicia asked the girl for one favor. A couple of minutes later, she and Lewis were hurrying up to the 5th floor. They stopped in front of a large door, behind which the battle between Ethan and Douglas should take place. Alicia walked up to the door and looked at the guy and said that she was going to open it. The next moment, the door began to slowly open. Upon entering, they froze in horror. Seeing a huge pool of blood in which were the dead bodies of Douglas's subordinates, Lewis covered his mouth with his hand, holding back the urge to vomit. Looking around, Alicia found it difficult to believe that Ethan had really done all this. She also noticed marks on the walls left by Douglas's sword. From their number, the girl realized that the two had been fighting for quite some time. The next moment, she looked up in surprise, thinking that the hole on the 1st floor was not even close to this huge tunnel. Without lowering her head, Alicia realized that in the battle with her, he was holding back. But for some reason, he decided to fight with all his might against Ethan. This seemed very strange to the girl. Lewis, who approached her, also looked up in surprise, not understanding where this huge hole came from. The next moment, Alicia noticed 2 people flying down. Taking a stance, she grabbed her sword and tried to see who exactly was there. A few moments later, she managed to recognize Glenn in one of the flying ones. But the girl could not see the face of the one who was chasing him because he was too far away. Her eyes widened in surprise when a couple of seconds later, she saw Ethan there, but he looked very different from his usual self. Lewis, standing next to him, asked in confusion what was going on. It seemed to Alicia that Glenn was in danger and took her sword out of its sheath. The next moment, she threw it, aiming at Ethan, turning it around so as not to seriously injure the guy. After that, she grabbed Lewis's hand and ran with him to the side, away from the hole in the ceiling. A few seconds later, a huge stone fell to the floor, raising a column of dust. Rising to his feet, Glenn looked in horror in the direction where Ethan was supposed to land. At that moment, Alicia ran towards him. The girl asked the guy what happened here. Before Glenn could say a word, Ethan's voice came from behind Alicia and Lewis, causing them to turn around. The hero approached them with a smile on his face. Seeing that all his comrades were assembled, he stopped, and with a satisfied face invited them all to play. This was the first time Alicia had seen Ethan in this state. Looking at his friend, Lewis said hesitantly that he probably shouldn't have come up here. The hero stood still with a bloodthirsty smile, waiting for their answer. Taking the silence of his comrades as agreement, he began to slowly approach them. When Alicia asked if he really was Ethan, the guy looked up at her, saying that she had a rather interesting ability, but it was useless. The girl asked in bewilderment what this meant. In response to her question, Ethan repeated that her ability was too useless, which angered the girl. Glenn, standing next to her, said that this was no longer the F-rank loser they knew before. The guy had already opened the door, about to leave here, when the girl turned around, asking what he meant. Glenn explained that Ethan was chasing Douglas around the entire building. In return for Alicia's help earlier, he advised her to run away from here as far as possible, while Ethan was busy chatting. Remembering what this guy had become after he finished speaking, Glenn said that if they wanted to survive, they had to escape. Immediately after that, he ran down the stairs, ignoring Alicia's request to explain everything properly. When Lewis said that Ethan had become even crazier than before, the girl asked in surprise if he had seen the hero in such a state before. The guy replied that that time he was more sane and it was possible to talk to him. Ethan did not pay attention to their conversation, looking at the girl with interest. He thought carefully about the best way to kill her, trying to see new ways. A few moments later, his insane laughter rang out. Covering his mouth with his hand, Ethan said that he could not stand it any longer. Smirking sarcastically, Alicia said that with such patience he would not get far. The girl said that it was not so easy for her to please, and then asked if he could claim something with such behavior. With the same maniacal smile, Ethan ran his finger over his dagger, asking why he didn't just kill all the candidates and the girl herself along with them. Sighing heavily, she told Lewis that she would try to buy some time, and he should run away from here. After that, Alicia ran forward, leaving the surprised guy behind. Assessing her strength, she assumed that she would last about 30 seconds. The hero also jumped up and ran to meet her. Alicia dodged Ethan's blow, noting that his actions were very fast and precise. During their battle, she did not notice how she received several cuts. Suddenly, the girl stopped, realizing that he had a rather strong ability, but it was difficult to control. In this, their abilities were similar. But for Ethan, everything was much more complicated than for her. When the guy asked why she stopped, Alicia smiled gently and said that it had been very difficult for him all this time, but he did a great job. Ethan froze at her words, even if only for a moment. But his gaze changed. from which Alicia read that deep down he had been missing such words of encouragement all this time. The next moment the guy smiled, saying that she also did a good job, after which he said goodbye to her and dealt her the final blow. The next moment Alicia fell to the floor. Looking at her motionless body, Ethan smiled even wider. When our hero was in his first year of primary school, he lost both his parents. He remembered the day when he and his uncle came to the morgue. The official version of their death was an attack by a robber. It took the investigator a long time to establish their identities, because the bodies of the boy's parents were severely mutilated. A funeral was held soon after. Ethan's only blood relative was his uncle, who together with his wife adopted him. Soon after moving in with them, his life became like hell. Alex and Chloe were F-rank losers, so they tied Ethan up and took out their anger on him by beating him senseless. To hide the signs of beatings, he had to constantly wear a warm, shabby sweater with long sleeves. One day, during recess, a classmate approached him, asking if it was too hot for him to constantly wear a photo. Ethan did not have time to answer because a girl appeared at the door, hurrying her friend. A classmate invited the boy to go to the store with them. Lowering his head, he replied that he was not hungry. Then the girl said that in that case, she would call him next time. When she left the class, Ethan heard her friend say that it was better not to approach him because he had no money, which is why he constantly wears the same dirty clothes. Immediately after class, he was beaten by other classmates. They demanded that Ethan show them all his ability, but he didn't have it. The children knew this very well, because he was the only one in the whole school who had not awakened it. They argued their attacks by saying that they simply wanted to help him awaken it in this way. Ethan couldn't do anything and just endured their constant bullying. To receive less from his guardians, he began to return home later. One such day, our hero was walking past the playground when he suddenly heard a rustling in the bushes. The next moment, a puppy jumped out. Wagging his tail, he walked up to the surprised Ethan. The boy knelt down and began petting the puppy. He responded by licking his neck with his rough tongue, making Ethan laugh from the tickling. From that day on, he began playing late at night with Jimmy on this site. This continued until one day his uncle went looking for his nephew, worried that he might be considered a bad parent. Ethan was very scared when he saw his uncle angry. Catching the emotions of her owner, Jimmy got out of the house that our hero was building for her and began to bark at the man. Alex looked at the puppy with disgust, asking if this is why Ethan comes home so late. The next moment, the man noticed that passers-by began to whisper and look at him disapprovingly. As he got closer to Ethan, he said that he could take this puppy to their home. Hearing this, the boy began to beam with joy, not believing that he was allowed something like that. That evening, he stayed up late with his new friend, reading him a book. When his irritated uncle asked why Ethan was still awake, the boy shuddered in fear. Hastily apologizing, he turned off the light in his room. The next day, Ethan approached his uncle, who was watching a football game, and asked if he could go outside to play with Jimmy, who waved his hand towards the exit, saying that he could do whatever he wanted. The boy beamed with joy. After that, he and his friend walked towards the exit to the street. Sometime later, they came to the playground where they usually played after school. Ethan was really happy that he finally had a friend. The boy did not part with Jimmy for a second, playing various games with him. The puppy also managed to become attached to the boy and followed him everywhere. This day became the happiest in the life of our hero. While playing, Ethan did not notice how quickly time flew by. Seeing that it was already 7 in the evening, he was afraid, knowing that he would be very scolded for being late. Calling Jimmy, the boy ran home. When Ethan returned as expected, he was scolded at the table. Alex asked if he really disrespected them so much that he dared to come home every time after dinner. Lowering his head, the boy apologized, saying that he forgot about the time. The man slammed his beer can on the table, saying that was no excuse. After which he asked irritably whether he would really have to run around looking for Ethan and the neighbors every evening. The boy apologized again, saying that from now on he would be more attentive. The next moment, the hero flinched in fear when Jimmy began barking at Alex. Ethan sat down next to him, trying to calm his friend, fearing his guardian's reaction. The puppy's barking angered the man even more. Clutching the empty jar, he said that he should have been minced right away. After his words, Jimmy began to bark even louder. Ethan begged his uncle not to be angry with the puppy, saying that he himself would scold him later. Rising from his seat, the man hit the boy, throwing him to the side. He looked at the hero with hatred, saying that all this time he had treated him too softly. But from today, everything would change. Then he ordered his wife to tie him up. The woman took out a rope and walked up to Ethan. Smiling, she said that since the child was unbelted, the parents needed to bring him to his senses. At this point, Jimmy began barking again in defense of his owner. The puppy was really getting on Alex's nerves, and he decided to show him where his place was by swinging his leg at him. The next moment, Ethan, with frozen horror in his eyes, saw his friend's small body fly to the side and hit the wall hard. Jimmy began to whimper quietly from the pain coursing through his body. Looking at this, the boy's uncle smiled contentedly, saying that the house had finally become quiet. The tied-up boy tried to crawl to his friend, but the woman did not let him do it, saying that he was in the way with his jerking. After her words, Ethan looked at his guardian with eyes full of hatred. Holding a baton in his hands, the man asked how he dared look at his parents like that. The next moment, he began to beat the boy, not even thinking about holding back the force, while his wife giggled disgustingly, watching from the side. A few minutes later, the man stopped and looked at the continuously apologizing boy, whose body was shaking violently. Sighing, the man said that weakness, combined with arrogance, was passed on to Ethan from his parents, after which he smiled widely and said that was why he beat them to death. At this moment, our hero's eyes widened in surprise. Chloe excitedly asked her husband if it was worth talking about this in front of the child. Alex replied that no one would believe Ethan, even if he decided to tell someone about it. Taking a sitting position, the hero said that his parents were killed by a robber. The man said that day he got very angry and beat them to death because they did not want to share the money. And at that moment, some idiot came through the window. He laughed as he talked about how that man tried to justify himself in court. At that moment, Ethan was overwhelmed with strong negative emotions, and the power that had been sleeping in him all this time began to awaken. At that moment, Jimmy rose to his paws and growled, looking at Alex. The next moment, he ran up to the man and grabbed his hand with his fangs. The boy was very scared for his friend and shouted for him to run away from here. But the puppy only grabbed his hand harder, and then the enraged man swung his club at Jimmy. The next moment, he hit the puppy on the head, causing him to fall to the floor. The boy, with tears in his eyes, began to apologize to Jimmy for deciding to bring him here. Ethan said that if the puppy met a loser like him, he would have a better life. The boy's eyes widened in surprise when he felt Jimmy lick his tear-stained cheek, reassuring his master. Then he made a happy face looking at Ethan. In the next moment, the obsession disappeared, and the boy saw that the puppy was still lying motionless on the floor. No matter how much the hero called his friend by name, he did not react at all. Alex said with irritation that this creature died too quickly because he had not yet had time to throw out all his anger, after which he told his wife to throw his carcass in the trash. The little boy did not understand why these people were killing everything that was dear to him, after which he began to wonder whether killing was really so easy and fun. The next moment, a small dagger appeared in his hand, with which he cut the rope binding him. After that, smiling widely, he slowly approached his guardian. The man did not notice the changes in the boy, only looked with interest at the dagger in his hand and asked where Ethan got it from. Suddenly, he realized that the boy's abilities had finally awakened. Alex laughed, saying that he was such a loser F-rank like them. The next moment, the man poked his baton into Ethan's stomach, asking if he was going to be the same as his adoptive parents. Without saying a word, the hero broke into a smile. When Alex said that Ethan's parents would be proud of him, the hero swung a dagger at his face. The man sat on the floor, covering the deep wound with his palm, trying to stop the bleeding. The woman immediately rushed to her husband. The hero took advantage of this moment and cut off her hand. Ethan watched the guardians huddled on the floor with a sadistic smile. The man tried to escape through the front door, but the hero quickly caught up with him and struck the man one blow after another until he died. After that, the boy turned his attention to the woman who had huddled in a corner out of fear. Putting the blade to her eye, he said that he would not kill her because death would be too easy a punishment for her. After gouging out the woman's eye, Ethan began to laugh wildly, saying that now he understands how hard it was for them to restrain themselves from killing his parents much earlier. A few moments later, the boy stopped laughing and, still looking at the ceiling, said that he was not having fun at all. Ethan opened his eyes, waking up from his sleep. He was breathing heavily, still haunted by the memories of his past. The next moment, a nurse came in to see him. Rising on his elbows, the hero asked where he was. Eliza replied that they were now in the hospital. The girl approached the guy and, touching him, said that it was too early for him to get out of bed. She then forcibly put Ethan back down. The guy looked at his hand, saying that his head hurt, and found that his palm was covered in blood. He immediately jumped out of bed. Ethan wanted to ask the girl something, but she did not let him start, saying that now he was absolutely forbidden to get out of bed. Then she asked the guy to calm down a little and listen to her request. The hero ignored her and grabbed Eliza by the robe, asking what happened to the bank and those who were there. The next moment, he turned pale when he asked where Alicia was now. He perfectly remembered how he tried to kill her. The horror of these memories filled the guy's mind. Seeing her patient's condition, the girl asked him to take a deep breath, but Ethan did not hear her words at all, saying that it was his fault that Alicia suffered. Raising his head, he looked at the girl in front of him. Eliza smiled uncertainly, telling the guy that he shouldn't worry about anything right now, Ethan ignored her words and with fear in his eyes, asked where Alicia was now. Eliza asked the hero to calm down, after which she said that that girl would come here in a couple of minutes. He froze when he heard that she was alive. But now he was worried about why she was going to the hospital now. The most logical explanation was that she had received serious wounds. The next moment, he rushed towards the exit from the room under the surprised gaze of the nurse, thinking that he had to verify everything for himself. The girl stood still, realizing that trying to stop this guy would be a waste of time. Sighing, she said that it would be better if he lost his memory. Ethan continued to run as fast as he could, oblivious to the fact that he was getting worse and worse every second. He blamed himself and his cursed ability for what happened that day. Meanwhile, Alicia was returning from the store in high spirits with full bags of groceries. Seeing the girl walking briskly, Ethan could not believe his own eyes. She was not wounded, and that day he did not cut her throat. He stopped in place to catch his breath, thanking God that Alicia was alive and unharmed. The hero fell to his knees in front of the girl, causing her great bewilderment. Placing her hand on his back, she asked if Ethan had really recovered so quickly that he could already run. She recoiled in fear when the guy began to roar at the top of his voice. Not understanding what was happening, Alicia sat next to him and asked in confusion if he was in pain or if something had happened. She tried her best to console the sobbing guy. Immediately after their encounter with the plague, the school was closed for a week. On the day of the incident, as soon as they got out of the building, Glenn told everyone about what happened to them and Douglas's escape. Afterwards, the entrance to this building was temporarily blocked due to the investigation. Alicia was interviewed, asking for details about her battle with the leader of a terrorist gang. Immediately after this, the girl visited Ethan, who was in the hospital. She wanted to tell journalists about him and his merits, but they simply wouldn't believe her. Looking at Ethan, the girl thought that if she had not seen everything with her own eyes, she would never have believed that an F-rank student fought back against Douglas Taylor himself. The moment the guy raised his dagger to attack, Alicia was sure that she was about to be killed. But contrary to her expectations, Ethan only cut off her horn, deactivating her ability. She looked at him in surprise, not understanding why he changed his mind. The girl noticed that his gaze became more conscious for a reason unknown to her. The next moment, he lost consciousness. Alicia put her hand up to prevent him from falling to the floor. She tried to bring the guy back to consciousness, but he did not react to any of her actions. Taking Ethan by the hand, she said that he should stop crying and get up from the cold ground. Ethan raised his tear-stained eyes to the girl and began to apologize for what happened. The girl got tired of listening to this, and she pulled him towards her, forcing the guy to switch his attention. Looking into his eyes, she said that he did not hurt her and that she was completely fine now. But her words made the guy cry even more. A week later, they returned to school again. After that incident, everyone began to look differently at our hero's class. Ethan was tired of their constant talk about meeting the plague. Our hero couldn't stop thinking that even though these were criminals who intended to kill them, the way he treated them was too much. He still had before his eyes the scene where he stood in a pool of blood among a bunch of opponents he had brutally killed. Previously, Ethan thought he could take control of his power, but he was wrong. The hero did not stop blaming himself for the fact that Alicia could have died because of him, but she was lucky because her ability was miraculously turned off. He did not want a similar situation to happen again, so Ethan decided that he needed to study his ability well, and for this matter, he needed a person who had already seen it in action and had enough knowledge. This man was Antonio, who developed his strength to the limit. Antonio was surprised to see Ethan there and asked if he should rest all week. The hero replied that he needed to ask something. Antonio stared at him for a few seconds. Interrupting the exercise, he asked what worried our hero so much. When Antonio came down, Ethan asked him if it was possible to divide souls by rank. He explained that the essence of a person's soul manifests itself in the form of a person's abilities, which determine a person's position in the ranking. Antonio asked Ethan if he was interested in what effect the rank letter had on the soul. Looking at his hands, the hero nodded. When Antonio said that rank has absolutely no effect, Ethan looked at his interlocutor in surprise. He explained that rank only gives access to various skills, but has absolutely no effect on a person's soul. A single tear rolled down the hero's face. For the first time, someone told him that souls cannot be divided by rank. The next moment, tormented by doubts, he said that a person's powers directly depend on the rank of the demonstrated ability. Antonio replied that this was true, but it did not affect the soul. When Ethan wanted to object again, the guy realized that his words were not truly heard and asked if the hero was trying to make sure his judgment was correct with his help. Hearing this, Ethan shuddered. Looking down, he saw his legs stained with blood. The hero always thought that souls could not be divided by rank, because his soul, thirsting for murder, must have the highest rank. His ability, which drags Ethan into the abyss of madness, and the factors that provoke it, made him doubt that souls really cannot be divided into ranks. Over time, he became sure that the main purpose of his soul was murder. The people he killed haunted his dreams, calling him a devil with a damned soul. They stood silently for several moments. Antonio sat on the floor and took one of the discs, saying that the first time he met Ethan, he advised him to start training. Looking at him, the guy admitted that at that time it seemed to him that the hero was not one of those who likes to work hard to achieve his goal. But to his surprise, even despite Ethan's constant nagging, he still came to their training. Antonio watched him carefully, realizing that not everyone could cope with his training. But Ethan succeeded. The hero, without raising his head, listened to his interlocutor. He clenched his fists, intending to explain everything to Antonio. But he didn't let him say anything, saying that the ranking system is designed in such a way that the higher the rank, the higher the overall combat abilities. Previously, he himself had wondered whether it was possible to obtain the highest level of combat abilities with a lower rank, because in this case, the meaning of the existence of ranks would lose its meaning. As he squatted the barbell, Antonio said that he was well aware of the fact that Ethan didn't come here because he was forced to. He was sure that the hero wanted to confirm his thoughts with him because the rank of his general combat abilities was higher than his main rank. Then he said that in reality there are no ranks. Ethan realized that he was simply denying his abilities. The hero was firmly convinced that such a dirty force could not be recognized as exceptional for its high rank. That's why he became interested in Antonio. Noticing Ethan's gaze on himself, the guy asked if he managed to answer the question that had been tormenting him all this time. Antonio was different from everyone he knew before because he managed to increase his combat abilities to A+ rank while his main rank was B. Looking at him, the hero said that there was one more thing that he would like to discuss. He told him about his real ability. Antonio listened to him without a drop of surprise on his face. Afterwards, he said that on the day of their meeting, his intuition did not fail him, and that time he really saw his true strength. Ethan asked in surprise if Antonio really believed his story. Returning the bar to its original position, the guy replied that there was no point in the hero lying to him. Lowering his head, Ethan thanked him for his trust. The next moment, Antonio asked if the hero wanted to learn to control his power. Ethan sat down on the bench next to the guy and said that earlier, he had hoped that he could at least resist her a little, but he was mistaken. After he hit one of the members of the enemy faction, sanity began to leave his body. With each new person he killed, madness seized him more and more. Ethan said he doesn't want to lose control of this power anymore. Looking at Antonio, he asked what he would do if he were in his place. Sighing, the guy replied that you need to create a healthy body and mind. This can only be achieved through hard training. Jumping up from his seat, Ethan said irritably that he had trained all his life, but nothing had changed. Antonio looked at him seriously and said that people who are unable to control their strength have a common distinguishing feature. Rising from the bench, he said that these people do not love themselves. Antonio pointed at Ethan, saying that anyone who doesn't love himself can't acknowledge his efforts and should start being proud of himself because he worked his hardest all along. The hero threw away his interlocutor's hand, saying that such things as love were not intended for him. With a sad smile, he said that he is a killer who takes pleasure in watching the suffering of others, so he is not worthy of love. Antonio asks Ethan if he worked all this time to become a killer, which took the guy by surprise. Smiling, he said that he needed to love himself. Antonio advised the hero to think in a different way, because all this time it was not Ethan, obsessed with murder, who was working diligently, but his other side. It was this side of our hero that worked to suppress his bloodlust. Antonio's words hit Ethan to the core. The next moment, he fell to his knees. Looking at the guy sitting in front of him, Antonio said that he always wanted to become the best. He admitted that before he was not as strong as he is now. Previously, he could not succeed no matter how much effort he put in. In all 3 years of high school, Antonio was never able to reach a strong opponent, losing every fight without lasting even a couple of minutes in the ring. At that time, he was too focused on his weakness and hated his low rank. One day, he wondered if he was well aware of the power he possessed. Then he decided that he should examine his own soul and realize his limit. Thanks to hard training, he was able to understand all his strengths and weaknesses. Over time, he managed to reveal the true potential of his power. One day, one of his classmates, who bullied Antonio for his weakness, challenged him to a fight. He accepted the challenge and, using his revealed ability, was able to take his opponent by surprise, approaching him with lightning speed and grabbing his hand. The opponent tried to free himself from the grip but could not, and Antonio knocked him to the floor, defeating him for the first time. Holding his shirt in his hands, he said that even now he continues to improve, wanting to become the best. Antonio then looked at Ethan, asking what he thought about this. The hero took off his glasses already knowing the answer to this question. The next moment, he threw them aside. Rolling up his sleeves, he looked at Antonio with a serious look and said that he, too, would surpass himself. The next day, the school gave the students a test. They were all in a room filled with acrid smoke. Mr. Reed said that firearms are completely useless against a person with abilities, and a chemical attack, on the contrary, can take their life before they even have time to activate the ability. Glenn didn't want to die like that and ran towards the exit. He banged on the door, not understanding at all why they needed to train resilience in this way. The guy demanded that the door be opened for him immediately. At that moment, another teacher wearing a gas mask approached Mr. Reed, saying that the cloud of poisonous gas was too dense for the students. After these words, Mr. Reed turned to the students and told them to start singing the national anthem. He promised extra points to those who finished the song. Among all the students, the only one who started singing was Ethan. Sometime later, the door finally opened and the other students watched in excitement as a cloud of black smoke came out of the room. Ethan was the first to leave, followed by teachers pulling out unconscious students. Approaching the chemistry teacher, the guy said that all the officers had fallen, so he would act as a speaker. The man covered his face with his hand, protecting himself from the smoke, and replied that Ethan could begin his report. The hero reported that the total number of people in the 3rd detachment was 11, 10 of whom dropped out due to gas poisoning. 1 remained. This is where he ended his report. In all subsequent tests, Ethan took first place. He was determined to receive a ranking badge. Whether it was an ordinary race or a test of observation skills, the hero gave his all, putting in maximum effort, trying to surpass himself. At the end of the testing week, all the results were transferred to the school principal. Each of the teachers left notes. After reading, which one could understand that Ethan was going beyond the scope of their school's evaluation system. The man reread the documents he received several times. He didn't understand how an ordinary F rank had such good physical attributes. Teacher Reed said other students received high test scores. Looking at him, Roger replied that this was not enough. The teacher looked at the man with confusion. Rubbing the bridge of his nose, the director announced that the 998th Brigade was heading to their school. He threw a folder on the table, saying that they did not like the fact that their school was now supported by the state, and most likely the school would be disgraced after their arrival. The man pulled the calendar forward, reasoning that the 11th graders were fine. The problem was only with the 10th grade. The director said they needed to step up their training. Mr. Reed asked what kind of training we were talking about. Roger placed a calendar in front of the teacher, answering that short-term training was needed to increase the students' fighting strength. Then he smiled meaningfully, saying that the 10th graders would be sent to their training base. The next day, our hero's class was busy unloading heavy boxes. Alicia looked at Ethan in surprise and asked why he was carrying 2 boxes at once. Smiling, the guy replied that since they were training now, he didn't want to miss this opportunity and get pumped up. The girl said that during lunch he also trained. Without removing the smile from his face, Ethan replied that this training was a little different. Sighing, the girl turned around and said that they had better hurry up. As they passed by their classmates, who were struggling to hold 1 box, Ethan noticed their surprised looks. He turned to Alicia, saying that everyone was looking at her. She replied that this was not surprising. This was her daily reality. Ethan paused for a moment, taking another look at his classmates. The next moment, he said that today they were looking at the girl especially closely. Alicia replied that this time they were looking at Ethan, not her. The hero looked at the guys in surprise, not understanding how he could attract their attention. When he suggested that it was because of his beauty, the girl faltered. The next moment, she said irritably that she would pretend as if she had not heard anything. Ethan continued on his way, looking around. Because of this, he did not notice how he bumped into Glenn. Unable to maintain his balance, the hero fell. Ethan apologized to his leader, saying he was distracted and didn't see him. Encountering the guy's caustic gaze, the hero smiled awkwardly. Glenn wanted to say something but changed his mind. He turned around and walked on, telling Ethan to look at his feet more often. Approaching Alicia, the hero said with amazement that their squad leader had somehow changed. When he asked what this could be connected with, the girl looked at him skeptically. The next moment, she asked if Ethan really didn't understand why no one had been bullying him lately. When Ethan, with a face full of incomprehension, suggested that it was because he was communicating with her, Alicia sighed and wearily replied that it was because he had become different, and everyone felt it. A few minutes later, they entered the building. Ethan followed the girl, asking her various questions. When he asked why Alicia didn't ask anything about his ability, she stopped. Putting the box on the floor, the girl replied that she was not interested. Ethan said he could explain everything to her. Smiling, Alicia said that he shouldn't try to attract the girl's attention in this way. Hiding her embarrassed reaction, the girl said that she restrained herself only because she was her, but others in her place would have fainted. Smiling awkwardly, Ethan said that he had already told Antonio everything. Hearing this, Alicia, in a fit of rage, grabbed the hero by the vest. Shaking the guy, the angry girl asked why he didn't go to her first, completely not noticing that they were no longer alone in the room. Glenn, standing next to him, looked at Ethan with hatred. He perfectly remembered the feeling of fear that he felt when he was in front of him that day. If he had not followed Douglas's advice, he would definitely have been dead. Glenn did not understand at what moment everything turned upside down. He turned around, deciding that he needed to look into everything carefully. Ethan smiled awkwardly, saying that he would tell her everything when they were alone, because now people were looking at them. Alicia let the guy go, telling him not to dare tell anyone else about this. The hero looked at the boxes they brought and asked why they were carrying them. The girl replied that it was to prepare for training. Ethan did not understand what she was talking about and asked what kind of training. Leaving the room, Alicia replied that they would have special training. A few hours later, they were given bags of equipment and uniforms, after which they walked from the school to the school base. Glenn was very unhappy that they were forced to trudge so far across the entire city. Ethan, in turn, thought that he should have taken 5-kilogram weights with him. Hearing this, Alicia looked at him in bewilderment, asking if he had sunstroke. The girl asked why he had previously tried with all his might to avoid training with Antonio, but now he was so involved in sports. Ethan froze in place, not having listened to the girl. The next moment, Alicia also stopped, noticing a bank building that was painfully familiar to them. Ethan tried to divert the girl's attention by saying that if he were in Antonio's place, he would already be carrying a 10-kilogram Hera in each hand. Alicia gave him a skeptical look, saying that interacting with this jock was taking too much of a toll on him. When the teacher suddenly announced that they were taking a 10-minute break, Ethan noticed the girl's changed expression and asked if she was okay. Alicia said that she should be the one asking him if he was okay. Smiling, the hero pointed to the building behind him and said that he had no reason to worry, because everything was already in the past. After his words, the girl breathed out a sigh of relief, thinking that she had worried about him in vain. At the same moment, someone approached her. Several passers-by surrounded the girl and began bombarding her with questions and asking for her autograph. Alicia smiled, thanking these people for their support. She was sure that this was all thought out by the director and that the break in this place was specially planned to advertise their school. Just conversations with students at their school will be a good impetus for raising the school's rating. Although Alicia had previously given interviews in the news, this was not enough. Even shop owners came out to talk to students of the sensational school. The girl assumed that the teachers had already taken care of everything in advance. Among the students, Alicia was not the only one who was weighed down by the memories of what happened here. Such an outburst on the part of management put a lot of pressure on everyone else too. When Teacher Reed approached her and also began thanking passers-by for their support. A couple of minutes later, he announced that their break was over and they needed to move on. Ethan looked at the girl worriedly, asking if she was okay. Alicia asked him not to touch her for a while because she had a headache. Before moving on, the hero paused for a moment and looked at the bank building again. He lied when he said that he didn't feel anything when he came here. He was overwhelmed with many emotions. A few moments later, he pulled himself together and moved on. Ethan forever decided that he was above his own soul and there were no ranks for him. At this time, Teacher Reed contacted the principal. He informed him that as planned, they walked near the bank, giving good advertising for their school. The man went out into the street parking lot and said that he would soon join them. Once in the car, Roger said that it was his responsibility as a battalion commander to share words of encouragement with the students who were tired from training. After that, he hung up the call and went to the base. A few hours later, they left the city. Teacher Reed stopped, warning that the path further would be very steep, so they needed to take a long break. Alicia took off her bag and called Ethan over. When the girl asked if he would have some chocolate, the guy's eyes lit up and he thanked the girl for her care. Then she took out the chocolate and handed it to the guy. Ethan turned around when he heard the sound of an approaching car. The next moment, a white car stopped right in front of Alicia and our hero. When the door opened, a man came out and said that it was too hot in here. Teacher Reed ran up and greeted Principal Roger. He nodded to the man and then turned his attention to Alicia, asking if she was coping here. The girl replied that she did not have any problems. Hearing her answer, the man laughed contentedly, saying that this was not surprising and that he could rely on her. When he noticed the guy standing next to her, he immediately introduced himself, saluting the director. The man had heard Ethan's name too often lately, so he immediately remembered that this was the same F rank who had distinguished himself. He looked at the hero with dissatisfaction, saying that earlier it was said to address him not as the director, but as the battalion commander, after which Ethan apologized for his mistake. The girl watched this and saw that the director was too biased towards the hero. The next moment, he said that the guy looked somehow more cheerful. Unlike the other students, Ethan excitedly began to talk about his training, but the director interrupted him, telling him to open his bag. The expression on the hero's face at that moment gave way to surprise. The man explained that they were conducting an inspection and asked Teacher Reed to give him a list with all the necessary items. Alicia watched as Ethan took out the entire contents of his bag. She knew that this guy was not the type to forget something, but if he accidentally missed something, the director would jump at this opportunity to belittle him. After going through the entire list, the teacher said that everything was in place. The man meticulously examined the list. The next moment, he smiled maliciously, saying that Ethan had not taken everything out of the bag and asked to show him what was there. The hero smiled and replied that he took something with him to train during breaks. The next moment, he took out several bags of sand, weighing 5 kilograms. The surprised man asked if he knew why they had come here. Ethan replied that they would have partisan training, where they would train not only strength, but also endurance. When Roger wanted to ask the hero another question, the teacher decided to intervene, noticing how desperately he was trying to set this guy up. He said that their break was over and it was time for them to move on. After his words, the man got back into the car. Alicia looked at the teacher, not understanding why he decided to intervene. The coaches were already expecting their players and watched from above as they almost reached their base. Noticing Alicia in the crowd, Olivia said that among all of them, this girl was the most worthy and worth testing. Antonio kept his gaze on Ethan, saying that it would be best to focus on him. Olivia mockingly said that he was an ordinary loser with a low rank and not worth wasting time on. She didn't understand Antonio's strange obsession with this guy at all. The girl knew that Ethan had good endurance and speed, but that was all. His ability is too weak. Antonio said that she shouldn't be so prejudiced towards him. Sighing, the girl said that because they trained together, he thinks Ethan is cooler than their first squad. Antonio looked at the girl seriously, saying that this guy was not just better than the first squad, he was much cooler than their entire platoon. Olivia's eyes widened in surprise when she heard his words. The next moment, turning her head towards him, with a threat in her voice, she asked Antonio to repeat again who is cooler than whom. The guy said that her attitude towards Ethan is based only on the previous battle of the squads, and she does not take into account his recent successes at all. Chuckling, Olivia said that Ethan only joined his club 2 months ago. Returning his gaze to the hero, Antonio said that in these 2 months he had changed a lot. He was confident that the result of this week's preparation would turn into Ethan's solo performance. Once in the barracks, everyone split into rooms. Taking the bed closest to the exit, the guy began to sort out his things with a smile. Seeing his number on the uniform, Ethan concluded that there were only 300 students here. When everyone had finished changing clothes, it was announced that the students needed to hurry to the departmental center. Ethan recognized Antonio's voice, which meant that those rumors about the 11th grade being their trainers were true. The guys with whom the hero was placed in the same room sat down on the floor and began to say that they were completely useless and that the end would come for them all. Ethan cast a contemptuous glance at these guys. A few minutes later, all the students gathered at the indicated place. Standing on the dais, Antonio announced that he had been appointed responsible for partisan training. Before sending everyone to the cafeteria, he wanted to make some important announcements. Antonio said that the best students would be placed in the first room, and the rest will be distributed among the remaining 9 rooms in accordance with their numbers. The guy explained that the numbers on their uniforms were their school-determined rank of overall combat ability. However, during training, students' performance will not depend on the number. This week of preparation will significantly affect their final grade. The disciples were surprised to hear something like this. Meanwhile, Antonio continued, explaining that depending on their efforts in training, one could greatly improve the rank of their combat abilities. Afterwards, he looked at his watch and said that it was now 12 o'clock. They had lunch until 1 o'clock and rest time until 2 o'clock. The instructors would tell us about the detailed schedule a little later. After lunch, the residents of the 10th room returned back, regretting that there was absolutely nothing left for them from lunch, because those who came before them had eaten everything. When one of them suggested that they intentionally get hurt in order to fly out of training, Pavel replied that there was a nurse here, so there was no point in it. Suddenly, Ethan burst into the room with 4 bags full of food. Approaching the bed, he poured all the contents onto it. The guys immediately surrounded him, sorting out the food. Opening a bag of chips, Ethan said that he didn't steal anything, so they shouldn't worry and eat in peace. A few minutes earlier, he approached Antonio, saying that he didn't have enough food. Smiling, the guy said that he heard that they decided to examine him during training. Afterwards, he went into the room reserved for the instructors and asked how much food he needed. When the hero replied that enough was needed for 15 people, Antonio froze in surprise. Then he laughed out loud. When his colleague saw Antonio taking all their supplies, he tried to stop him. The guy looked at him with a death glare and said that the instructors were given extra lunch, so there shouldn't be any problems. Justin was afraid to argue with Antonio, so he was forced to retreat. Returning to Ethan, he gave him the bags of food. When the food was eaten, the hero asked if everyone was full. The guys actively nodded their heads and began to thank the guy, calling Ethan their hero. When one of them promised to repay him for this service in the future, the hero looked at him carefully. Afterwards, he said that if they really wanted to thank him, they should promise something. Facing their blank faces, Ethan asked that they all give their best in the upcoming training sessions. Nick and Ryan said in bewilderment, "What is the point of trying if they are all from the last room and are the worst students?" Ethan interrupted them, saying that he knew this very well. When Ryan asked if he realized that they all had terrible abilities, the hero smiled and asked if there was anyone here with a rank lower than F. After this question, everyone looked away. Alfred, who came forward, said that Ethan had changed a lot lately and he would like to become better too. Nick exchanged glances with Ryan, after which they nodded to each other. The next moment, Alfred nominated our hero for the role of their leader. Everyone supported him. Worried, Ethan rose from his bed, asking if anyone was sure no one was against the idea. An hour later, their training began. Smiling, Ethan easily performed all the exercises, giving it his all, and the guys from his room tried to keep up with their leader. The instructors noticed this group, which stood out from the rest. Olivia watched Ethan in bewilderment, not understanding how he had the strength to laugh during training. Antonio, standing next to him with a satisfied face, said that he did not expect anything else from a member of his club. The girl said that not only Ethan excelled, but also all the students from the last room. She was confused and did not understand at all what was happening here. A few hours later, Antonio announced the end of training. Immediately after this, the exhausted students sank to the ground. He also said that the schedule had already been posted, and they could look at it on the bulletin board. Then he turned to Ethan. Ethan stepped forward at the instructor's request. Antonio said that all residents of the 10th room receive additional points. Nick and Justin looked at each other happily, not believing that they had actually achieved something. Everyone else was no less happy. That evening, Ethan waited for the girl at the appointed place. Looking at his watch, he thought that he had arrived too early. However, the next moment, a familiar silhouette began to appear from the shadows of the trees. Alicia approached the guy and asked how long he had been waiting. Smiling, Ethan replied that she shouldn't worry about it. Looking at his number on the bike, she said when he was about to leave the last place. Thoughtful, Ethan replied that after gorilla training, the girl looked at him in surprise, saying that he was very self-confident. Turning to her, the hero said that by the end of next week, he would definitely receive a ranking badge, no matter what it cost him. Sighing, Alicia asked what rank he was aiming for. Ethan replied that if possible, he would try to reach colonel. The next moment he smiled and said that perhaps even up to the sergeant, which made Alicia, who was walking next to her, laugh a lot. With her hands folded behind her back, she said that would be good. Ethan did not hear the girl's words and asked what she had just said. Alicia replied that he just imagined it, and she didn't say anything. Early in the morning, their training began again. Glenn was not happy with whoever created their schedule, forcing them to get up so early. Suddenly, someone rushed past him at breakneck speed. The guy looked at Ethan's back in bewilderment, amazed at his amount of energy. The instructors and the nurse watched their training from the balconies. Olivia could not hide her surprise when our hero began to be ahead of the entire group by as much as 2 laps. Eliza replied that she was not at all surprised by this, but the other guys from the 10th room bothered her. They looked like the living dead. She asked Olivia if she remembered yesterday, and then said that no one dropped out of training yesterday. She also added that none of the guys benefited from medical assistance or restoration of stamina. Olivia was perplexed. It was hard to believe that after such a hellish training, no one began to restore their stamina. Now they are practically dead. Antonio watched his ward's team silently all this time. Smiling, he said that the team of the dead was a great name for these guys. In the evening, a list of students who were in the top 20 and would receive extra points was posted. Ethan was in the leading position. Alicia was in second place, followed by all the other residents of the 10th room. The next day, Justin led Ethan's team. He was dissatisfied with the fact that he was assigned to be the instructor of this particular student. He literally felt their searing gaze in the back of his head. The guy was trying to understand how they managed to enter the top 20, because they are the weakest here. Lost in thought, he did not notice how someone called him. When Ethan suddenly touched the instructor's shoulder, Justin became afraid. Turning around, he asked what happened. Smiling, Ethan said that he was curious about something, looking at him. Justin thought that this guy seemed quite normal in appearance, so he decided to relax a little by talking to him. He said that this was the first such training for the hero, and if he needed anything, he could safely contact him. Ethan thanked the instructor and asked him to tell him how to quickly overcome the obstacle course. Justin clicked his tongue and said that he wouldn't advise them to do that. The hero looked at him in bewilderment, asking the reason because extra points are given for quickly completing tasks. Justin replied that points would be given only after completing the entire training. Antonio would meet them at the physical training tasks and give them additional tasks while all the other students completed the obstacle course. When he heard a strange laugh behind him, he turned around looking at Ethan in bewilderment. Smiling widely, the hero asked his team if they had heard everything. Punching himself, he said that the faster they finished, the higher the score they would get, and the longer their training would be. Looking at them, Justin realized that it was Ethan who was at the head of these psychopaths. Soon, everyone successfully completed the obstacle course, with the exception of Ryan, who was afraid of heights. Mary, standing next to Justin, asked if he had instructed them correctly, because they could not complete this task so quickly. The guy handed the girl a progress report, and she was surprised to see that absolutely everyone had passed. Touching the bridge of his nose, Justin said that she simply didn't see them at the very beginning. When Ethan says jump, everyone jumps. If he says climb, then everyone climbs. Mary had a hard time believing his words, because during the Battle of the Troops, this guy constantly ran away. At the same time, Ethan encouraged his comrade, shouting that he would succeed and that he should be braver. Ryan looked down at his leader, thinking that he shouldn't let their entire team down because of his fears. The next moment, he jumped down, screaming in horror. When he was downstairs, our hero rushed to happily hug the guy, saying that everyone had done it. Justin, with a skeptical expression on his face, said that they would now go to Antonio's training. Throwing his hand up, Ethan happily said that it was time for training. Everyone picked up his cheerful mood and followed him. Covering his face with his hand, Justin invited Mary to switch teams, but she refused, wishing him good luck. On the third day, Antonio said that they would train their own abilities. He said that this workout was scheduled for another day, but due to the extreme heat, changes had to be made. Everyone began to discuss the training ahead of them, making assumptions about exactly how it would go. Concentrating, Antonio thought that even though the weather had disrupted the entire schedule, it was not critical, because in such heat, the limit of endurance becomes more obvious. The purpose of this training is to ensure that all students can continue to fight using their ability even when they are at their limit. Previously, they only used abilities when she was in her normal state, but today, they can unleash their full secret potential. He was confident that at the end of this training, students with strong will would become even more interested in their abilities. Announcing the start of the training, Antonio warned the students that it would be aimed at using the ability. He then pointed to the boulders behind him. When the guy said that they must use all their strength to break them, the students shuddered in horror. Meanwhile, Antonio continued, explaining that each of them will try their strength depending on the serial number. Those who fail to reveal their strength must give way to the next student. Many were confused because their abilities were too weak or unsuitable to break such a block. Overhearing their conversations, Antonio said that they should not draw any conclusions so early. Approaching one of the boulders, he said that many of them already knew his ability. Afterwards, the guy stood with his back to them, concentrating. Taking a stance, the guy activated his ability. The next moment, he moved with lightning speed to the boulder and squeezed it with all his might. The stone began to crack under his fingers. Ethan watched Antonio in amazement. A few seconds later, he managed to lift this huge stone with his bare hands. Suddenly, he tightened his grip and slammed the boulder onto the ground with all his might. The next moment, it split into pieces, raising a large column of dust. Antonio turned around and walked towards the students. One of Ethan's eyes changed color to red, and he could see that this guy was much stronger than when they first met. Not only can he now move quickly over long distances, but the weight of the chosen target no longer matters to him. Looking at Antonio, the hero hesitantly scratched the back of his head. It was even difficult for him to imagine how much he needed to train in order to progress so far. All the students lost their last shreds of confidence when the instructor said they needed to do the same. Seeing such a reaction, Antonio, with a threat in his voice, asked if everyone understood their task. His gaze gave the students goosebumps. They realized that they would not leave here until they completed what the instructor had just shown them. Antonio walked over to Olivia, who had the group list, and called the first person. Alicia walked out with her sword in hand. She ran her hand along the blade, calling upon the power of her weapon. She stood up for a few moments and Antonio gave permission to begin. At that moment, her clones appeared behind the girl. With a few swings of her sword, Alicia cut the boulder into several pieces. She completed this task brilliantly in just a few seconds. Everyone looked at the girl with admiration. Olivia also looked at Alicia's retreating back, thinking that her abilities were on a completely different level than the others. Then she called the next student. Using his ability, Glenn pulled a huge tree out of the ground and walked towards the instructors. The guy was determined to show everything he was capable of. He didn't want to be inferior in strength to Alicia, or even that loser with an F rank. He stood in front of the boulder and raised the tree trunk above his head. The next moment, he hit the stone with all his might. No matter how much Glenn hit the boulder in front of him, there was no result. Watching this guy, Olivia thought that in his ability, he was somewhat similar to her. A few minutes later, the tree could not stand it and broke. When Glenn irritably threw him aside, Antonio said that he didn't have to worry, because when evaluating him, he would take into account the guy's ability itself. Then he called the next person. The third student also coped with his task brilliantly, breaking the stone into two parts. And sometime later, Antonio called the last one from the list. Ethan stepped forward. He chose the largest boulder among the remaining ones and approached it. Everyone looked at him in surprise, not believing that he could actually handle it. Many were sure that this task was only meant for someone like Alicia or Antonio. The next moment, they remembered that this guy is the leader of the 10th team, whose members seemed to have broken free and did not give up until the last breaking boulders. Meanwhile, Ethan activated his power and created a dagger. The students looked at him in bewilderment, trying to understand how this guy was going to destroy such a block with such a small weapon. The next moment, the hero looked at Antonio with a silent question in his gaze. The guy understood what exactly Ethan was asking permission for and silently nodded his head. Having received permission, the hero closed his eyes and carefully began to release his dark side. He concentrated all the energy in his right hand, preventing it from getting out of control and taking over him completely. Perceiving the change in Ethan, Glenn stepped back in horror, afraid that he would turn into a psycho again, like that day. Alicia also became worried and unsheathed her sword, preparing to attack him at any moment. A few moments later, Antonio gave permission to begin the task. The hero squeezed the blade tighter in his right hand and covered his mouth with his left, biting the inside of his palm. The next moment, he made a series of quick and precise swings with his blade, causing the boulder to crumble into small pieces. Ethan threw blow after blow, concentrating on his movements. At one point, the control of his power weakened and his madness tried to break out. Ethan bit his palm painfully, regaining control. Olivia watched the guy's actions in a stupor, not understanding where the F rank got such strength. Looking at his watch, Antonio said that there was still a little time left. A couple of moments later, the boulder broke into small pieces, raising a huge column of dust. Ethan, sitting on his lap, tried to deactivate his ability, but it was beyond his control. Antonio approached him and told him to call him if he needed help. Ethan thanked him and, biting his lip painfully, tried to once again take control of his power. He could not afford to constantly rely on the help of others. Looking at his hand, he wanted to at least partially learn to control his ability. When the dust fell to the ground, all the students began to look at each other in surprise, not understanding where that boulder had gone. Standing next to the hero, Antonio smiled and said that he had succeeded. Rising to his feet, Ethan showed him his right hand, saying that this was only possible thanks to his help. He smiled contentedly because he had managed to master a partial killing skill that had an A rank. Running to Alicia, the hero said that although it was not perfect, he did it. Looking at him, the girl admitted that he made her seriously worry. She wanted to say something else, but at that moment, Ethan was surrounded by members of his team, and with eyes full of admiration, they began to shower their leader with congratulations. Alicia, standing to the side, watched as the hero was quickly picked up and began to be thrown up. Sighing, she decided that she would have to cede Ethan to these guys for today. In the evening of the same day, the hero came to the teacher's room in the hope of finding a nurse there. But no one opened the door for him. No matter how much he knocked, Ethan thought that the girl had gone somewhere. He intended to wait for her arrival because since the start of training, the guys from his room had never once asked for help to restore their stamina. But in his thoughts, he did not notice the approaching steps. When a man with bags in his hands asked who was there, Ethan drew attention to him. He looked at his teacher in surprise. The man annoyedly asked what Ethan was doing here, since it had been said earlier that you couldn't come here without permission. The hero did not know how to respond to this remark. Suddenly, the man began to approach Ethan, causing him to become confused. The guy couldn't think of anything else to do but scream throughout the entire corridor, throwing the teacher into bewilderment. Leaning towards his problem student, Teacher Reed asked him to shut up because if he was caught here, he would be severely punished. Ethan looked in surprise at the man who was trying to persuade him to leave here as quickly as possible until one of the teachers came here. The next moment, Teacher Reed's fears were confirmed when the door to the teacher's room opened and a man came out and asked what was going on here. The teacher immediately noticed our hero. Throwing his arms to the side, he said that he had never even expected such a meeting with the one and only F-rank disciple. Approaching the hero, the man mockingly asked if he had come to complain to his teacher about the too difficult training. Mr. Reed decided to intervene before it went too far and told Ethan to go back to the barracks. Throwing his hand on the guy's shoulder, Teacher Ron said that you shouldn't be so harsh with your students. Afterwards, the man entered the room, dragging Ethan with him, and said that since everyone was finally assembled, they could relax a little and have a drink. After his words, teachers began voting on which nearby restaurant they should go to. Snuggling close to Ethan, Ron said that there were no instructors here, so he didn't have to be shy. Afterwards, he asked if Antonio had been too harsh with them during training. Smiling, the guy replied that he liked the training sessions that he arranged for them. At that moment, Teacher Reed grabbed Ethan by the hand and pulled him towards him, asking if it was time for him to go to the barracks, because it was almost time for curfew. Teacher Reed said that there was no need to rush the guy so much, because there was still time, and then asked what brought Ethan here. When he replied that he was looking for a nurse, the man laughed and turned to Eliza and said that this guy had come to her. After he headed to his place, Ethan at the same moment told the girl that he had come here to talk about restoring the stamina of his guys from the 10th room. When Teacher Ron got into his laptop to look at the current grades for guerrilla training, he was very surprised to see our hero's name in the first place. Other teachers were also shocked by this and assumed that it was just some kind of mistake. Ethan was amazed at the irresponsibility of the teachers. For the past 3 days, they had not bothered to look at their students' grades even once. Teacher Ron looked at the guy contemptuously, asking if he had given Antonio a bribe so that he would give him and all the other students from the 10th school high scores. Ethan was struck to the core by such arguments. He replied that Antonio was not one of those who would buy money. Pointing at the monitor, the teacher asked in bewilderment how a student with the lowest rank was able to take first place in ability training, if not through bribery. The hero shouted that all the results he received and the results of his comrades were earned honestly. Teacher Reed, who was holding him, said that he had better stop and go back. After that, they turned around, and the teacher was about to pull the door handle when Ron asked if it was too late for Reed to start protecting his students, because through his fault, they were on the verge of death, after which he said that starting tomorrow, he would have to start monitoring the 10th class. Teacher Reed ignored his words and pushed Ethan towards the exit, saying that they had to go. However, our hero could not just allow the teachers to devalue the work he and his team had put in. Suddenly, he shouted out that he had a question. Teacher Ron looked at the guy in bewilderment, wondering what he would say. Without turning around, Ethan asked what would happen if, in front of all the teachers, the entire 10th room entered the top 30. The next moment, he turned to the teachers and asked with a smile what they would do then. For a few moments, the teachers fell out of reality. After recovering from the shock, they all began to laugh. Ron said that Ethan had a great sense of humor. Still smiling, the hero said that he was completely serious. The next moment, Teacher Ron said that if this really happened, he would promote the entire 10th room to corporals at once. The other teachers supported this proposal and immediately began to place bets. After that, Ethan headed for the exit, saying one last time that the teachers be sure to keep their promise. Eliza rose from her seat and followed the guy. When she caught up with him outside, Ethan apologized to her for causing a commotion in the staff room. The girl said that she should have apologized for not getting him out in the first place. Looking at her, the hero replied that everything was fine, after which he said that he would need her help as a nurse. He explained that if the 10th room was restored, they would easily enter the top 20. Eliza said with a smile that he was very confident in his abilities, and then asked to show her the way to their room. Ethan replied that it would be best if she came in after he cleaned up their room a little. At the same time, students from other rooms were beating Ethan's team, trying to find out where he was now. Looking at the beaten guys, Casper said that the rumors that their F-rank leader had conspired with the instructor turned out to be true. Alfred objected, saying there was no collusion. However, Caper did not let him finish, kicking the guy in the face. Bringing Alfred to his knees in front of him, he said that the 10th room had too much ego, since someone dared to challenge his words. Ethan sat around the corner, watching from the side. He was very angry with Casper. But the hero understood that now was not the right time to run into problems. It was too obvious that they were deliberately trying to provoke him into a fight. He was thinking about who would be best to call for help in this situation, the teacher or Antonio. Ethan emerged from his thoughts when someone fell near him. The next moment, the hero's face changed. Nick was lying in front of him, shuddering in pain. When the guy told Ethan that he better not get involved in this, his common sense left his body as our hero. Turning around, Casper said with satisfaction that Mr. Liar had finally decided to honor them with his presence. Approaching him, Ethan asked what Casper needed from his team. The bully ignored the question addressed to him, after which he asked if the hero was taking on too much, deciding to try on the role of the main one. Ethan was not going to listen to all this and said that if Casper left now, he would keep silent about what had happened. Bending down, the bully asked what he was going to do otherwise. Casper said that most likely the hero will run to complain to Antonio, who is covering him, or to the teachers. Turning to his friends, he declared that their number one was losing ground and was not capable of anything without cheating. Listening to these annoying taunts, Ethan's crazy side began to surface, and he had to bite his palm again to come to his senses. At that moment, Glenn appeared in the corridor. Calling out to Casper, he said that if he wanted to fight so badly, then he should try his hand at training tomorrow rather than show off now. Then he slammed the door to his room. However, Casper and his comrades ignored his words. They began shouting for their leader to show this loser the power of the 7th rank. Ethan was still standing, covering his mouth with his hand, trying not to lose control of himself. He thought that if he got into a fight now, he might lose too much later. The hero could not afford to just miss the chance for him and his team to be noticed. Standing opposite him, Casper tried to get at least some reaction out of Ethan, goading him in various ways. But the hero did not react in any way to his words. Then Casper assumed that he was so frightened of him that he could not utter a word. The next moment, he activated the ability and decided to attack Ethan by lengthening his limbs. The hero did not expect that this guy would decide to use his power in such a place. He turned around and was about to run, but the enemy's arms grabbed him, not allowing him to escape. A few moments later, Casper completely enveloped Ethan's body. Looking into the eyes of his opponent, the hero grinned that, looking at his arms and legs, he looked more like a worm than the stick insect that they call him. Afterwards, Casper tightened his grip on the hero's neck, asking how he still had the strength to chat. Squeezing Ethan's entire body, the guy told him to try cheating again, just like in training, until he broke a couple of his bones. With every second, the grip on his neck intensified, and Ethan almost couldn't breathe. Looking at him, Casper asked with interest whether the hero would even try to pull off some trick. Ethan really didn't want to do anything. He just wanted to let his opponent do whatever he wanted, and when he'd had enough of it, he'd leave happy. The members of our hero's team could not so easily watch their leader sacrifice himself. He tried to divert Casper's attention to himself. Looking in their direction, the guy asked with a grin whether they would really dare to attack him. After his words, the guys from the 10th room really got up from the floor and ran towards him. Ethan watched this in horror, reminding himself that he just needed to be patient for a little while, and then the nurse would come. The next moment, Casper attacked the guys running towards him, throwing them back. When everyone was on the floor again, he said that if they were weak, they should sit below the grass and not stick out. Shaking in pain, Nick stood up, saying that they had lived their whole lives like this, but their leader was different. Ethan looked at him in confusion. Meanwhile, Nick continued, saying that day he was also there when Glenn called Alicia to the roof. At that time, he was too stupid and full of strange beliefs. Even when Ethan stopped Alicia's strike, they still continued to consider him inferior to them, because he was only an F rank. Hanging his head, Ryan admitted that he too was there that day. Nick turned his gaze to the hero, saying that he was mistaken all this time, because unlike them, who only supported Glenn's cruelty, Ethan was the only one who tried to stop the fight, which is why he is much more amazing than them. These words affected our hero. The next moment, the guys got up from the floor and again ran towards their offender. Casper again threw them aside with one blow. He said with irritation that since his words did not reach them, he would have to show everything with a concrete example. Ethan, looking at his guys, realized that he was very mistaken in thinking that everything could end so easily. After all, it was he who taught them not to give up. The hero remembered that he promised Alicia that he could get his rank badge this week. It was because of his selfish desire that he argued with the teachers, saying that his team could get into the top 30. Just his desire does not mean that other guys want it too. Ethan realized that today they would fight to the last, even knowing that their opponent was much stronger than themselves, because it was he who taught them this. The next moment, he created a dagger. Noticing this, Casper said with a grin that this was not the first time he had seen his pathetic ability. Ethan ignored his words and turned to his team members, telling them to listen carefully. Looking at Casper, he said that if they fight only with the help of their strength, they will not be able to defeat even such a pathetic insect. Having loosened control over his power, Ethan said that Casper was too presumptuous, relying only on his ability. The next moment, he threw off his opponent. Taking a stance, the hero said that to win it is not at all necessary to have a strong ability. Casper looked at the guy in front of him in bewilderment, trying to understand how he managed to free himself from his grip. The next moment, Ethan approached him. Having been wounded in the leg, Casper fell to the floor with a loud scream. The hero looked at him with confusion, asking how, with his inability to endure pain, he managed to get 7th place in the ranking. Looking at Ethan standing in front of him, Casper began to beg him for mercy, saying that he was very sorry. The hero dispelled his ability and looked at him arrogantly, saying that he was too pathetic. Casper began to crawl back, seeing how the look of the guy opposite him had changed. But he didn't manage to get far. Ethan quickly caught up with him, and the next moment, Casper's cry of pain was heard throughout the entire floor. Tying his hands in a tight knot, Ethan looked at his team, saying that they too could handle him without using their powers. He then looked at Casper and asked with a smile if this was the specific example he wanted to show. The guy screamed in fear, afraid that he would be hit again. The next moment, he could not stand it and lost consciousness. Rising from the floor, Ethan said that Casper was wastedly boasting of his strength, and when it came down to it, he immediately passed out. All this time, his friends watched from the sidelines and recoiled in horror when the hero remembered their existence. Turning to them, Ethan asked with a smile that he had to deal with all the garbage. Their next morning began again with an exhausting run. Glenn is still amazed at how fast Ethan rushes past him. He really didn't understand what kind of monster he had to be to not even be out of breath after 10 laps around the training field. The next moment, he noticed something strange. Looking around, the guy noted that the guys from the 10th room, unlike in previous days, were barely trudged today. The instructors watched the students closely from their seats. Olivia looked at Eliza, asking about student number 7's condition. The girl answered wearily that, although with difficulty, she managed to restore his condition. But he suffered a strong emotional shock, so it would take some time before he could return to training. Rubbing the bridge of her nose, she added that she also managed to patch up the guys from the 10th room a little after the fight, but they were unable to restore their stamina, so today they will have a hard time. Antonio sighed sadly after the girl's words, looking at Ethan's team. When the run was completed, he called our hero over and asked if the guy could guess why he was called. Having received his answer in the form of a nod of his head, Antonio said that because of what happened yesterday, Ethan was given demerit points. His eyes widened in surprise when he heard that he had been demoted to 300th place again. He expected the punishment to be severe, but he didn't think it would be that much. Afterwards, the instructor turned around and said that everyone could be free and go to breakfast. Ethan had no choice but to resign himself. He was lucky that the hall was not talking about his expulsion. Then everything would have been many times worse. But his team could not calmly accept such news. The guys called out to Antonio, saying that it was too unfair, because the students from the first room were the first to start a fight, and they were only defending themselves. Turning around, the guy told them to stop appearing and hurry to the dining room before all the food was taken away. Ryan came forward and asked why their leader was being punished for only protecting them. Sighing, Antonio shouted that everyone gets penalty points for refusing to carry out the order of the elder. After that, Ryan tore the number off his uniform, saying that he's had enough. No matter how much effort they put in, they always remain litter for everyone else. Turning to them, Antonio asked them with a threat in his voice if they wanted more penalty points. At that moment, Ethan stepped forward, shouting that they were ready to accept their punishment. Antonio looked at him in surprise. The members of our hero's team fell silent, casting puzzled glances at him. Ethan began doing exercises as punishment for his group's behavior. Ryan and Alfred looked at their leader sadly, thinking that he must be very angry right now. The next moment, they joined him and began doing push-ups under the close supervision of the instructor. At some point, Antonio announced that on Friday afternoon, there would be a skill competition between the best guerrilla fighters. He said that this is where the guys will be able to show everyone else everything they are capable of and prove that they are something more than just litter. After his words, Ethan lit up, realizing that this was his last chance to make up for everything he had lost. Antonio looked at his watch and saw that there were 20 minutes left until the end of breakfast. He told Ethan's team that they could be on their way up. The exhausted guys followed the instructor's order and got up from the ground. Smiling, Antonio said that they should hurry to the dining room. After such an exhausting morning workout, the guys barely ate and trudged to breakfast, wondering if they had anything left. At the same time, Teacher Ron came out of the cafeteria. He immediately noticed Ethan and his team approaching. Approaching the teacher, the hero greeted him and asked how breakfast was. The man replied that the food here was not to his taste and it would be better to eat ramen. After the man's words, the guys from Ethan's team glanced displeasedly at the teacher. He noticed that their team was the last to arrive this morning, making it more obvious that they had been using dirty tricks in the previous days. Smiling, Ethan replied that they simply did not have any strength left due to hunger. At that moment, the teacher approached him, saying that strange information had reached him, that one of the best students had been knocked out yesterday. The hero realized with horror that Casper was in Teacher Ron's class. Meanwhile, the man continued by saying that witnesses reported that Ethan was the one who beat his student. The next moment he laughed, patting the hero on the shoulder. The man said that his student was always good at telling jokes, but this time he outdid himself by coming up with the idea that a 7th-ranked fighter could lose to an F-ranked 300th. Ethan couldn't believe that this teacher didn't value him so much that he didn't even believe his own students, who were participants in yesterday's incident. Ron said that starting tomorrow, the teachers will train with them. Although this is problematic, It is the only way to prevent cheating. Teacher Reed and an exhausted Eliza approached them and intervened in the conversation, saying that breakfast was about to end and everyone should hurry up. A few moments later, Ron's teacher was led towards the exit of the building. After that, all the guys ran to the dining room, praying to God that there would be at least something left there. Ethan remained in place. He had a bad feeling. The next day, as promised, the teachers joined the students in training. Teacher Ron noticed that Teacher Reed wasn't even out of breath as he performed the fourth set of squats, 50 times each. Approaching him, Ron said that he would not have expected anything else from the physical education teacher. He was doing an excellent job with the exercises. Olivia, who was observing the students, noted that the students were not in the best condition today. The teachers are trying to monitor them, but due to the fact that their training is not going well, the students' mood is also lost. She also noticed that many were never able to regain their stamina, so now they are just sitting out. What alarmed her most was the students from room 10. They became even more like zombies. To her surprise, this also affected the motivation of the other teams. Ethan and his guys were much more helpful than she had originally thought. Olivia looked at Antonio, wondering what he would do. The next moment, the guy told everyone to stop doing the exercises and listen to him carefully. Afterwards, he said that he perfectly understands that many want to save their strength for the competition. So now one person from each room will be selected to participate in the training competition. Ethan became interested when he heard that the room with the most points would go to rest for the rest of the training. The next moment, he stepped forward, introducing the 10th room. Teacher Reed wanted to follow him as a representative of the teacher's room, but Ron came up and said that he would feel too sorry for the children if they confronted the physical education teacher, so he would go himself. Reed looked at the man walking forward in confusion. A couple of minutes later, the remaining students also chose their representatives and they came forward. Ethan thought that getting first place and then resting would be pretty great, but if he overdid it now and spent all his energy here, he would not be able to show himself in the competition. The next moment, Teacher Reed approached him, saying that with him, our hero would not be able to cheat. At the same time, Antonio began to explain the rules, saying that students who finished with one exercise move on to the next. Those who do not have time are eliminated. Then he added that everyone else, except team representatives, should return to training. The time Antonio spent explaining the rules was enough for our hero to decide that for the sake of the guys on his team, he should no longer hold back. A couple of minutes later, they started doing the exercises. The teacher, who was full of energy, unlike the students, completed the exercises with ease. Looking at him, the other students were afraid that they might fly out too quickly. A few moments later, their fears were confirmed, and Antonio said that students from rooms 4, 7, and 2 had dropped out. Looking at them, Teacher Ron grinned contentedly. However, when Ethan, standing next to him, said that he had already completed the 9th exercise, the man looked at him in surprise, thinking that this guy was much faster than he thought. At the same moment, Antonio announced the elimination of several more students. Ron remembered that this Ethan was just an F rank, and it would not be difficult for him to bypass such a weakling with a little effort. A few minutes later, the hero announced that he had completed the 11th exercise, causing the man to freeze in shock. Looking at their confrontation, Alicia realized that it would not end so quickly and had absolutely no desire to take part in it. When she got up and walked towards the rest of the guys, Antonio said that the first room was eliminated. Meanwhile, the hero continued his competition with the teacher, ahead of him by several exercises. The man could not overtake him, which greatly infuriated him. When Ethan began to perform the 3rd set of exercises, Teacher Ron could hardly keep up with him, every now and then glancing irritably in the guy's direction. The man was already on the verge of fainting when the hero announced the completion of the 9th task of the 4th approach. The next moment, the teacher looked at Ethan furiously and said that he could not sit and watch the hero's team get an undeserved rest. On the 7th approach, the man could not stand it. Under Ethan's surprised gaze, he gave in, saying that this guy was a real monster. After that, Antonio said that the teacher's room would leave, and the students from the 10th room could go to the shade and rest until the end of the training. Coming out of the field, Ethan's comrades with worried faces inquired about his condition. The hero smiled tiredly and said that the teacher lasted much longer than he expected. Afterwards, he sat under a tree, telling the guys that they could relax and recuperate while there was time. Ethan had overexerted himself while competing with his teacher, and now all his muscles were aching in pain. A couple of hours later, they all moved to a specially prepared hall, where Antonio announced that they would now begin the last stage of guerrilla training, the competition of abilities. Standing waist-deep in mud, Glenn clicked his tongue when the instructor said some people might be unhappy about it because they don't have anything special. Antonio advised them not to write themselves off prematurely because there would be surprises in this competition. Clenching his fist, He said that he believed that students could find the strength to get rid of their shortcomings, turning them into their strengths. Just as he was about to go on to explain the details, a joyful voice came from behind Antonio. Director Roger, who came in with the teachers, said that the guy had done a good job over all these days. Without taking his eyes off Antonio, the man said that as a battalion commander, he considered his presence necessary at such an important event as a competition of the abilities of his precious soldiers. Antonio bowed to greet the director. Afterwards, he hesitantly said that it was to him that the man left partisan training. The director replied that the competition was the last part of the preparation, so he must attend it. Antonio sighed and took the folder with documents from Olivia's hands. Afterwards, he handed it to the director, saying that this was the competition plan. The man took the papers handed to him, and looking through them, he said that he was not mistaken in entrusting this matter to Antonio. Having studied only the very beginning, he closed the folder and handed it to Teacher Ron, saying that it was all too confusing, so he would make everything simpler. The next moment, his voice rang out from the speakers mounted on the wall. Ethan felt that Roger's appearance here did not bode well for him. Looking at the students, the man said that he would now explain to them the rules of the competition. He said that the competition will be held both with and without the use of the ability. Anyone who ends up outside the field is immediately eliminated. Those who raise both hands are also considered losers. The same applies to those who lose consciousness during the battle. After this, the director announced that the briefing was over. Antonio approached him and asked how the man was going to separate the students. The next moment, Roger came to his senses, saying that he had forgotten to tell about the most important thing. All 300 students would take part in this competition at the same time. The students looked at him in confusion when he said that in this royal battle, each of them would be assigned a certain rank. Meanwhile, the man continued, saying that the longer they last, the more points they will receive. If they contribute to the elimination of other participants, they will also receive points. At that moment, Eliza approached him, reminding him about the safety bracelet and the rule regarding those who break it. Showing everyone his hand with a bracelet, Roger said that each of the participants should receive a protective bracelet from the nurse. It is designed exactly the same as the one used in previous competitions. It absorbs the damage received and breaks. Usually breaking a bracelet means defeat, but if someone wants to continue the battle, Roger will accept their persistence and allow them to continue participating. Eliza was horrified by the man's words, and Olivia couldn't believe that he had pushed back all of Antonio's plans for such a stupid idea. Ethan looked at his watch, thinking that he had no choice. He needed to try to last as long as possible and score more points. Although he was able to control his strength yesterday, in his current state it might be too difficult for him. Looking at the surprised reaction of the students, the principal said that they must learn to remain calm in any situation. The next moment, he looked at the wall clock and saw that it was 2 minutes past 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Then he said that they would start at exactly 2 o'clock. Alfred said in disappointment that they wouldn't even be given time to get used to the mud in which they were standing. Ethan looked at Antonio. He looked at the students sympathetically. The director announced that the conditions for this competition were too harsh, which went against what they had been practicing throughout this entire week. A couple of moments later, when the clock was exactly 2, the director announced the start. Michael immediately chose his target and told his guys that they should focus on the unarmed Glenn. Hearing this, the guy shuddered. He understood that he could not cope with all of them without the necessary strength. He began to run away from a group of opponents who had turned against him. A few moments later, Glenn was pinned against the wall, creating a taufe in his hand. Michael said that he would deal with him before he had time to find an object to use his ability. Grinning, the guy said that none of his opponents looked around at all. The next moment, he touched an iron beam on the wall next to him. After that, Glenn removed the beam, making it his weapon. Michael looked at this in horror and tried to run away as far as possible through the thick mud. But he didn't have time, and the next moment Glenn attacked him. Surrounded, Alicia looked towards the fighting Michael and his guys, telling the guys around her that everyone there was fighting so hard that they should join in too. Then she turned her gaze to them and asked if they were really going to continue keeping her trapped until the end of the competition. The next moment, she activated her ability, telling them to try and catch her. Immediately after this, the girl ran forward. Ethan's team stood aside all this time. The guys asked him what they should do because the director loves people with unusual abilities. The hero was in no hurry to answer. He thought that Antonio would first let them get used to it, and, based on the results of the battle, would assign each student his own rank depending on their abilities. But due to the rules introduced by the director, students with stronger abilities will draw all the attention to themselves, and it will be quite difficult for other students to achieve high ranks. Ethan was pulled out of his thoughts by Ryan's call, asking him to pay attention to what was happening. The next moment, a guy stepped forward, saying that our hero's team would have to disappear before the competition without abilities began. Ethan created a dagger and shouted to his boys to prepare for battle. The next moment, the two teams ran at each other. Dodging the enemy's attacks, the hero shouted to his team to try to hold out until the start of the competition without abilities. Roger, who was watching the battles, said with satisfaction that the kids were doing a good job, but Antonio did not share this opinion. He said that the disciples had not even warmed up yet, and those with strong abilities would gain too much of an advantage. After his words, Teacher Ron approached him, and placing his hand on his shoulder, whispered that although Antonio was an instructor, he was a battalion commander, so he should refrain from such comments. The man heard his words and, laughing, said that everything is in order. The teacher needs to take into account the fact that this boy put a lot of effort into preparing for the competition. Approaching the director, the teacher said that he was absolutely right. Rubbing his chin, Roger said that the students should take extra time. After that, he picked up the microphone and announced that in 30 seconds, they would move on to the no-ability competition. Ethan began to strike more actively after the director's words. He shouted to his guys that they only had 30 seconds left to hold out. All this time, another part of the students was chasing Alicia, trying to catch her in various ways. She smiled, saying that she was already tired of playing catch-up with them, so it was time to finish. The next moment, the girl created her clones and ran towards the guys. Some immediately found themselves out of bounds. Glenn has successfully resisted his opponents all this time. He swung the beam from side to side, aiming at his opponents.